Hello everyone and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Today we're doing another battletome review and we're diving into the Soulblight Gravelords battletome today, and for that I've brought my co-host Ryan. Hello Ryan.
Hey everyone.
And we're both very excited to dive into this book. Actually, the leaks came out when I was visiting you in Amsterdam, and we talked briefly about the book, but we hadn't really checked out anything in detail. We were just both actually discussing how that we've experienced the book so far, or at least what we've seen from the leaks. Well, we've seen everything, of course. And both you and I, Ryan, found that this book was quite a difficult thing to review completely, right? Or
Yeah,
thoroughly.
yeah. I'm pretty used to books that have a lot of depth to them. You know, Cities and Stormcast being one of them, or two of them that have a lot of war scrolls. And I'd already analyzed this book from the second edition. I actually owned the second edition book as well, even though I don't officially play Soulblight. And for some reason, I don't know. In processing everything, I was going through all the comparisons from the what changed from the second book to the third, and it wasn't obvious how everything really should be combined. I think part of my hold up here is that it definitely wants you to use summonable units. And I don't like horde armies, and a good chunk of what the summonable stuff is, with some exceptions in this, the way the book's written now, is going to lean into some amount of pushing small models around. And I just myself was trying to find ways to experiment with the rest of the range, and I feel like that's an uphill battle, which you'll see with my list later. But we'll get into that. But I feel like the book is a little less obvious what you want to do with it than it was before, and I don't know if that's going to just take some time to get one's head wrapped around, or if everyone's going to kind of feel that way after a few months. Anyway, but you know, when you were speaking of you visiting. I was actually shocked at how much you had picked up from the book already. I don't know how early you got up that one morning, but you you like knew the whole battle tome already, which I was really shocked by. Yeah, you must have been reading it off your phone. I don't think you even had a computer with you, right?
No, I just read it off my phone when before I went to bed actually, and that was just one pass through. But honestly, from all of the armies that I've played throughout my Warhammer years, from Age of Sigmar and Fantasy at least, I've probably played the vampires the most, which is surprising because I'm such an elf lover. But I collect high elves and vampire counts in Fantasy, and vampire counts was by far my favorite army at the end of Fantasy because it was just such a blast playing it during the end times. And when Age of Sigmar came around, there really wasn't anything cool about the elves anymore. They were just put there in the Cities of Sigmar, and I know you like that battle zone, but I really did not. So I went full on Soulblight Gravelords, and I've actually played a lot of games with it in its first couple of stages. So that's maybe why I picked up so much that quickly, because I just have a lot of things to anchor it to, maybe.
Sure. Did you play Legions and Gash as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So as per usual, we'll first go over all the allegiance abilities. Then we'll cover the favorite war scrolls. We'll also talk about important changes. This actually I've moved to the conclusion page. So this should be something else now. Both Ryan and I have made an army list. Obviously, it's super early days. The book hasn't even officially come out yet. So these army lists are just a way for us to show you guys what you could possibly do with the book, but it's not any guaranteed way that is going to be a successful list at all. Though I have to say, especially after the Amsterdam weekend, I have extra found faith in Ryan's list building capabilities. So even though he's kind of down on his list a little bit, I do feel that it's probably going to be quite sturdy still. And then we'll also form a conclusion.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
that's sweet. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. So the allegiance abilities, they're all very familiar. They've cleaned up one of them. First of all, it's the Endless Legions ability. both the Endless Legions and the Unquiet Dead ability are so long. It took me a while to type it all out. So at the end of the movement phase, you pick one Soulblight Gravelords unit that is summonable and that has been destroyed, and you roll 1d6. You add 1 to that roll if it's during your own movement phase, so that means you can also do it during your opponent's. On a 4+ or on a 3+ in your own phase, you can return that destroyed unit with half the models rounding up. It must be set up wholly within 12 inches of a Soulblight hero or a gravesite. More on that later. And it has to be more than 3 inches from the enemy. This is pretty big because usually with these kinds of effects, it's more than 9 inches away from the enemy. But it cannot make a charge or pile-in move in the same turn. If you return a summonable hero, this is pretty cool, follow the same rules but return it with 3 wounds. So you still have to deploy it within 12 and 3 inches away from enemies.
Quick correction, it's return it with 3 wounds allocated, which means if they have 16 wounds,
right.
a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, he's down to 13.
Yeah.
He's got 13 left, which is much better than the other way around. For small heroes, obviously, it doesn't matter. But
yeah, a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon is also not summonable, so it's only it's Kritza, the White King on foot, and the White King on steed, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're right. But yeah, so which one has the most wounds of the 3 of those?
The White King on steed.
Okay, and is it like 8 or so?
That's a good question, actually. I think maybe 7.
Yeah. So then he would be coming back with more than it looks.
Yeah.
I think it was 3. Okay, cool. Yeah, keep going.
So yeah, you cannot return a unit more than once, and you cannot replace units that were replacements themselves. So this means, let's say you're bringing back 20 Graveguards, so you place 10, then you cannot choose that unit again to resummon 10, or neither can you choose the 10 unit to resummon 5, for example. This is, in my opinion, quite a cool rule, or cool change at least, because in the previous book it used to be at the end of your own battle shock phase you had to roll a 5+, and you could add +1 for each destroyed enemy unit that turn, I think. And obviously it was outside of 9, and you could still, in theory, I guess, still charge, but it was the end of your turn, so there was no real charges involved. This is much cleaner. You can plan ahead with this, and there are some very cool ways you can utilize this with synergies in the book. And it also makes for very good screens, since you can deploy them 3 inches from enemy units. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I'm going through all the things that changed here and trying to figure out what to make of some of them. So switching from movement to from battle shock phase to movement does what you just said. Like you can screen better. It's in their turn as well, and you can of course it allows you to redeploy. Right? It doesn't say anything about not being able to redeploy. So you could oh no, it's into the movement, so there's nothing you can do about that. So I guess you're still stuck not moving, right? And it's just 3 inches. That's not having.
Yeah.
It's a weird timing change, because functionally it doesn't make much of a difference except for what you just said about screens, right?
Well, there is some differences, because in this case you can also do it during your opponent's movement phase, as you just said, and that changes things quite a bit, I think. If you're, say your opponent is moving closer to one of your Graveguard units who have a 2-inch reach now, I think.
Yeah.
And you manage to summon a small wall of skeletons or zombies between your opponent's charging units and your Graveguard, you might actually be able to attack them with 2 inches, and if they only have 1 inch range, they can't get to you through that screen. And honestly, compared to the previous version where they could plan around it because you had to do it in your own battle shock phase, now there's really no way for them to respond to it, because it's at the end of the movement phase, so their movement is also done. They're kind of stuck with what you've dropped on them now. And this is also very cool with a couple of abilities. For example, the Legion of Night battle traits that allows you to countercharge, I suppose we'll call it. So, which is pretty big. You could just as well drop a screen in front of your zombie Dragon Lord. Someone charges your screen, and with Legion of Night, you charge them in return, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and obviously you can put more bodies on objectives, so
Yeah,
that's
also.
that's
Yeah.
that helps. Before, when it was at the battle shock phase, was
Yeah.
it was it before or after you counted your objectives? This says the end of the battle shock, so that would still be before, right? Because after the battle shock phase is when we count.
Yeah, it's at the end of the battle shock phase. So
Yeah, so
yeah.
you were still able to grab objectives using it that way, but this way, you know what's interesting about this is it gives your opponent, as someone I play against Soulblight all the time. I've played him 32 times out of 200 something games I've played, and so I've become mostly familiar with not liking their rules, and in fact that's why I bought the battletome from the first place. Is if you can't beat them, join them, or at least learn your enemy. But that battle shock phase, it gets you every time. It got me so often where I'd be like, oh, I've got this objective. And they'd be like, well, on a 5+, I'm bringing back this unit or whatever, which is what it used to be. And then you're like, well, screw it. Now I don't have that objective anymore. And so at least by doing it at the end of the movement phase, you have more time to interact with it. And it's not going to gotcha as much as it did previously. So yeah, I guess that's good for game balance too. And now, what do you think of it being on a 4+ or what is it, +1 if it's in your own movement phase 3+, instead of based off of how many units you've killed?
Yeah, I like it a lot because before that, it kind of felt like you had to punish yourself and get your units killed to get maximum advantage out of that rule. And now it's just basically on every turn. So even if you lose a screen to a minor shooting phase during turn 1, for example, and you take the second turn in round 1, you can already bring that unit back quite easily on a 3+. It is unmodifiable, so there's nothing in the book that makes this easier. So that is a bit of a downside, but I think in the end, I really expect you to be able to use this rule more often than you did in the previous book.
Yeah, and coming up around a hero is helpful too, because it's relatively easy to turn off the grave sites. But of course, with it being within 3 inches of enemies now, that's gotten harder to do, is turn off a whole grave site. You know, but it really depends on how big your unit is that you're bringing back. And it's cool. It is cool that you can bring the heroes back too. There's a lot of rules that interact with the summonable keyword. So. Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's going to take a minute to kind of get used to, because it's much more reliable now in so many ways, but more interactable. So
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
Okay, on to the Unquiet Dead, which should have probably have been the first rule we discussed because it talks about grave sites. So after territories have been determined, choose 2 points in your own territory and 2 points. 2 extra points anywhere on the battlefield outside of enemy territory to be grave sites. So they could just as well be in your own territory once again. So anywhere besides your enemy's territory. They must be more than 1 inch from all terrain and objectives. If both players can set up grave sites or faction terrain, the winner of a roll-off chooses who goes first. During deployment, you can set up Soulblight summonable units in the grave sites as reserve units. You can set up 1 unit in this manner for each unit you've deployed on the battlefield. At the end of the movement phase, you can set up 1 of your reserve units wholly within 12 inches of gravesite and more than 9 inches from enemies. So this has changed not at all or very little. You did the comparison, right?
I didn't find a single change. So right. Obviously what we just said about bringing people back around gravesites has changed, so you could argue that way. The only thing I'd really point out here is for people that aren't aware, but the grave sites, a lot of times people use tokens or like little actual grave like models. It's important to remember that the exact center is the grave site, just like an objective, and it has nothing to do with how big of a thing you bring or how big your token is.
Yep.
So being 1 inch away from terrain and objectives is relatively easy when it's only an infinitely small point. And then also measuring from it. So that can catch some people out sometimes. But, you know, what I often find is the grave sites on the table are so easy to move just casually, even if it's a model. And you're allowed to stand on them too, which if you make them 3-dimensional, makes it harder to do that. So I always found the grave sites in practice harder to use on the table in a fair way. Just because of all these little things that kind of catch people out or can kind of be problematic. But It's thematically obviously very cool.
Yeah, I wish they gotten rid of this rule. Even though I love it thematically, as you said, it is just so cumbersome to play with. They also made it less important, to be fair, to be around grave sites now. Before, you actually needed the grave sites to keep your Deathless Minions ward save active on you. Now that's luckily a thing of the past. So you really only needed to get your units in from reserve or to resummon your units from Endless Legions. So maybe now we'll have less of a thing where you're moving over your grave sites, because maybe you're going to place them more on the sides of the battlefield now. We'll see. But I do agree with you. It's so easy to move them accidentally, and it is so annoying. It is already quite difficult to keep all your objectives still on the field, I feel. And this just adds to that, I think.
Yeah. One thing I'll mention real quick before we move on is that I've always found the battle traits for Soulblight difficult, because they're all names that could basically be interchanged with one another.
Yes.
Endless Legions, Unquiet Dead, Deathless Minions. It's like, I can't remember which one's which. Let's just call it what it is: grave sites and ward save.
Yes.
And yes. But anyway, all right, let's move on to the next one.
One last thing to point out here is the rule hasn't changed, but what is summonable has changed, in the sense that now you can also deploy your White King in the grave. So that's
and is any unit summonable that previously wasn't? I don't know if there is.
Well,
but,
apart from the 3 heroes?
Yeah. As in like regular iterable units.
No.
Okay. All right. So there we go.
Okay. So Deadly Invocation, this has changed a little bit. In your hero phase, pick up to 3 Soulblight Gravelords, summonable units wholly within 12 inches of a Soulblight Gravelords hero. Heal up to 3 wounds to that unit, or if no wounds were allocated to that unit, return slain models with a combined wound characteristic of 3 or less. So this is the basic resurrection mechanic that is in all resurrection tomes. You can add 1 to the number of slain models, so models, not wounds, that are returned if the unit is wholly within 12 inches of a grave site. You cannot pick the same units to benefit from this ability more than once per turn. So that's quite big, because with 3 wounds or less, you're only ever returning 1 Black Knight, for example. But if they are within 12 inches of a grave site, then you can at least add another Black Knight to that. So that is quite cool.
Yeah, this one needs an FAQ, I think, because, so like, what changed with this rule? A lot changed. It used to work based off of what type of hero you were.
Yep.
And it was worded, even in the FAQ, that each hero that can do this can trigger this, right? So now the wording is, in your hero phase, you can pick up to 3 friendly Soulblight Gravelords summonable units wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Soulblight Gravelords hero. The thing is, A, in Warhammer parlance, does not mean of one friendly Soulblight Gravelords hero. It could be that every hero can do this. There's nothing else that says in the rule that it can't. It does say you cannot pick the same unit to benefit from this ability more than once per phase, but it doesn't say how many trigger points it's coming off of. And so, especially whenever we're moving from an old book to a new one where there was a precedent set, it's not always clear. Like, it's in our head that multiple heroes can do this, and nothing in the wording is very clear. I think they'll probably rule it that it's only one time you pick a hero, but I don't know. How did you read this when you read it for the first time?
It is very interesting that you brought this up, because I hadn't even thought about that. I fully assumed it was multiple heroes, exactly because, as you said, it is just a precedent. Because now, reading it objectively, I also do think it's probably going to be just one hero, but that seems super weak. As in, dangerously weak.
Yeah, I mean, and some other things that change is it's now in the hero phase instead of at the start. That's a small thing, but at least you can wait to see what your opponent's done for their heroic actions and stuff, if that's the difference. And then it's no longer based off of what type of hero it is, like I said. And it does the 3 instead of D3 wounds and +1 if it's within a grave site. That's definitely a buff. Mm-hmm. So even if it does end up being one hero, it's definitely interesting how this works. And spoiler alert, but Nagash can like turn this into like bringing people back on crack. essentially. So you're going to get a lot more juice out of it if you bring half of your list as Nagash. But it says I think it's a strong ability whether they rule it one way or the other. But definitely if every hero gets to do it, it's going to be stronger.
I wouldn't mind it as much if it was one hero, if it wasn't wholly within 12. If it was within 12, we're talking a whole different game here. But wholly within is kind of strict, I feel.
Yeah, I could see them leaning towards every hero still, especially considering the precedent and that Warhammer parlance, the word "a" doesn't usually mean one instance of it.
Yeah.
So.
But if you're a friend, if you're playing your friendly game, you're trying out the book before the FAQ, it's probably safest to assume it's just one hero right now, just so it doesn't really create any feel bads that you have to apologize for later on. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Deathless Minions, this has changed quite drastically in the sense that there is no more measuring from grave sites or heroes. It's just all of your units have a flat out 6-up ward, which is the same change the Ossiarch Bone Reapers got. It's cool. I like it. I hated measuring everything. It was so annoying with the pilings, and you just then you got 1 inch out of your grave sites measurements, and then your entire unit lost a ward save, and it was just, you lost a lot of time that way. So this is great.
Yeah, six up ward can make differences with large amounts of dice rolls, but I often find it's more just kind of I remind my opponents all the time, especially at tournaments when they're starting to get tired. Hey, you forgot your ward save. You forgot your ward save. You forgot your ward save. You just get used to it, but I don't know. When you can make it 5, like Nagash can make it 5, that's pretty good. But six I find is just kind of icing on the cake sometimes.
Yeah,
but it's still better than nothing.
I mean, on a horde of 60 zombies, that's quite good.
Yeah, exactly. Weighted dice situations.
Yeah.
It can make
yeah.
It's important to note that we did lose a few battle traits.
Yes. I'll quickly go back.
We're about to cover one of them. The Locust of Shyish, which used to double up spells, has now been moved onto spells themselves, so it's just been moved elsewhere. And then Reanimated Horrors was the -1 or -2 bravery when you're around certain units. That doesn't happen anymore.
I quite like that ability, actually.
Yeah, but people forgot it all the time. And Battle Shock is such a weird non-thing sometimes in the game. It's either really important or not important at all. Yeah. And so it was so easy to forget. And then it's also good to remember that the White Dwarf update that we had for quite a while gave us a number of extra things. And one of those is called Deadly Coordination, which had an ability to let you fight after a non-monster hero had fought. That's totally gone or moved into specific sub-factions if it exists. So, that's what we've lost in the battle traits. I'm overall happy that they streamed it down a little bit because that page was super long and hard to keep track of everything on that. There was so many FAQ notes on that original spread that we had there from the 2nd edition book. So it's definitely gotten easier to manage, I think.
Yeah, it felt a little bit like playing 40k when I picked up this army again once in a while between Loomdeath games, just because there was so much text, so much FAQ stuff to keep track of, and then the White Dwarf that I didn't manage to buy, so I had to look it up every time. It was not a fan, but now it's good. I like it. All right, moving on to the spell lore. So there's only 2, and every spell lore only has 3 spells. And as Ryan mentioned, the Locust of Shyish has been obliterated, or at least has been moved to every spell. And every spell now does something extra on a 9+. So whereas Locust of Shyish just gave an extra cost of that same spell on a 9+, I think it just triggered twice. Now it does different things. Sometimes it will trigger your spell twice, but depending on what spell it is, it might do different stuff.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why this is so good is that even though that sounds great to get double spells, as any Lumineth player with the Enlightener will know, it doesn't actually apply to a number of your spells.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people felt like it was a little bit of a non-battle trait, but now they've definitely fine-tuned it, so it's better.
Yeah, and it was once again something that you had to keep track of, and now it's just on your spell, so when you're reading your spell, you're gonna remind yourself every time anyway. So I thought this was actually quite cool. Oh, something else we didn't mention that has been removed is the Invigorating Aura spell.
Yeah, I was about to mention it under this section. Yeah, it's the one that, gosh, it was based off of how many guys you had on the field, how much it ended up costing, or how many plus you had.
Yeah.
And then what did it do again?
It returned D3 models or wounds.
3 wounds. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's been kind of replaced, I guess, or merged into Deathly Invocation, I guess. Whatever one of the ones we just covered.
Yeah. See, but that's one of the extra reasons why I keep thinking that it might be multiple heroes being able to do it, because if you're just looking at Invigorating Aura and then what we've got left now, there's only one resurrection mechanic, and summonable units are even more important now than before. So I know, we'll see. Let's cover the lore of the vampires first. This lore was actually never that impressive, and to be honest, I think at first glance you might think that it's still not very impressive, but I do think a lot of these spells are quite useful actually. So Soulpike has a casting value of 6 and a range of 24, and already this is the thing that I want to point out here. 24 inches is quite a long way. If you're used to doing overwhelming heat with your Lumineth, for example, you'll notice what a big difference it is to the usual 18 inches on most spells. So 24 is quite generous. You pick one enemy unit within range invisible to the caster. Until your next hero phase, if that unit makes a charge move, roll d6s equal to the charge roll. I do think it doesn't mention unmodified charge roll here, because I tried to stick to the exact wording. And for each 4+, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. And if you roll a 9 to cast, you can pick 2 units instead of 1. Yeah,
so in short, it's the anti-impact hits.
Yeah.
The impact themselves.
This is probably the least impactful spell of the 3, I would say, but it does factor into how you do how you play mind games with your opponents in this case, because sure, it probably won't do as much as you really want it to do, but it does kind of scare off your opponent sometimes. Sometimes they'll just chuck an extra unit in for good measure, and now if that unit is already quite wounded and they roll a very high charge roll, that is quite dangerous for them to do, and it might actually make them think twice about putting in an extra unit or something.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the good news is the lore's been toned down to 3 spells, but I feel like the spells on the vampires themselves are pretty good. Like the warscroll spells, and so I don't feel like, and not a lot of them are 2 casters, so I feel like you're not really hurting for good options. It might be a bummer that we'll talk about what you've lost, but in general, I feel like this one's kind of, like you said, it's just kind of there. It's nice if it makes sense in the right situation, and if you get to pick 2 units and you're about to get alpha charged, then cool, that's even better.
Yeah, to be fair, as Ryan mentioned, most vampires have their own warscroll spells, except for the Vampire Lord on foot. And he'll probably be casting one of the other 2 spells here, actually, which we will get to in a minute. Okay.
I think a couple of the named ones might, like the Cursed City ones, might not have a spell, but we'd have to go back and look at it. But yeah.
Oh yeah, the Cursed City ones don't have one, yeah. Okay, Vial Transference is the same as it was before, or sort of the same, I guess. 6 to cast, 9 inches, pick 1 enemy unit within range and visible to the caster. Roll d6s equal to the wound characteristic. This is quite good. For each 5+, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound, and you can heal 1 wound allocated to the caster. And this is where the juice comes in. On an unmodified 9+ to cast, the effect triggers on a 4+ instead of a 5+.
Yeah, so you were saying this is really good against Gargants, which is obviously the case. The healing part is interesting because it's great to be able to heal, but as we can kind of almost say as a general army-wide buff, almost all vampires, if not all, have the hunger now, and it works the same for all of them and it caps at 6 wounds that they can get back. So your vampires are going to be healing a lot anyway. Obviously for your I'm thinking the bigger targets like Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, who's got 16 wounds. So this is going to give him some extra room to be healing stuff. But yeah, I think it's definitely more based off of how many mortal wounds you're doing against the enemy, and then the healing is just a nice, flavorful side effect that you're
100%.
not.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it is useful on the big guys, as you said, Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, Neferata maybe, or Vordry. Especially because on the non-unique heroes, there's a lot of artifacts that you can put on them to make their save unrendable or to make them tankier. And there's also a lot of spell and ability support from other places in the book that make units quite tanky. So combine this with the hunger, and if your unit doesn't have a delete unit to kill a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon outright, it'll be difficult to get them to stay dead.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And then Spirit Gale, I think this was one of the spells that I saw the most whining about on the Soulblight Facebook page. I love the Soulblight Facebook page, don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of us were very unhappy. And I was transported back to the second edition book that we got. It was the last book from second edition, if I remember correctly. And I think the entire Facebook page deemed that book as unplayable. And within 2 weeks, it was top of the charts.
Right.
So I do feel that it is probably the same. It might be the same thing here. It probably won't, but it might be the same thing in some regards. For example, with Spirit Gale, everyone was saying what a useless spell this is. Just one mortal wound doesn't really matter. But this on a simple Vampire Lord on foot who's not casting anything useful most of the time anyway is actually quite nasty, I would say. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't described it just yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Each enemy unit on the battlefield without range, it's just everyone, suffers one mortal wound, and then you can do it again. The first thought that comes to mind here is, like you're probably about to point out, is putting a clock on all your GCs because they've only got 5-6 wounds, whatever. But remember, unmodified 9 to cast is not happening all that often. So you're not, Nagash's +3 or anyone else's pluses aren't going to be helping this out. But it's still nice that it could trigger twice. And then the other thing to keep in mind for those Lumineth players out there playing Techless, the Aura of Selenar, this is going to, don't cast this against that player because every single unit gets hit by it, and if they get hit twice, is going to be spitting back so many more wounds. Yeah, and Khorne. You also don't want this to go off on Khorne because then they're getting blood type points over everyone. So this spell's great as long as it's not against those two armies, I think.
But how often have you had that time where there's a small hero left on a wound that you can't really target anymore, or a battle line unit that has just managed to retreat with 1 or 2 wounds or models, and then capping an objective in the back line, and you, with just Spirit Galing them off, can still finish them off for a battle tactic or something? It is just so versatile. I really like it, especially it's not going to kill the GCs all on its own, but that's not what it's meant for. It's to soften them up and you finish them off with help of your other spells, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I think mainly what people are probably reeling at, I feel like this is definitely an upgrade from what it used to be, but what they're reeling at is just that this is one of the spells and there's a lack of other spells to choose from. But I think this is a great, just kind of get you out of a pinch, or putting a clock on a bunch of dudes kind of thing. Like my KO army's got 6 GCs in it, and none of them have more than 6 wounds. So if this goes off every turn and then 1 time or 2 times you get a 9+, then all my guys are gone. So it's pretty strong. It might be worth pointing out too which spells we lost that were important. I'm not going to go through everything, but the big one is probably the amethystine pinions, which gave 1 unit plus 6-inch movement characteristic until the falling hero phase or whatever. That was really key for the Castellite build, or with a zombie dragon, or any of the big monster heroes like Vordry. Not having plus 6-inch movement does make a difference. So I can see some people being kind of miffed at that, but the rest I think weren't amazing. Like Amaranthine Orb is gone and Blades of Shyish is gone, but I don't think that's a huge problem. Nagash has been taken off the top line of the text, as in like who can cast these spells, and I don't know if that's going to need an FAQ. His War Scroll says that he knows all the lores of the 4 armies, the 4 death armies, but usually they still put his name up at the top, kind of like they do with Teclis and Luna. And so that might technically mean that he can't, but I think any TO will rule it as Nagash still knows all the spells. So
yeah, I do miss the amethystine pinions here. The orb I took quite often and probably never cast. But the pinions was just such a crucial spell, especially because the game is really one in the movement phase anyway. And I don't really feel like 2 times 3 spells is a lot for an army full of wizards.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't mind them putting back 1 or 2 spells, but hey, this is what we've got.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they don't have their own endless spells either. So
yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, not gonna lie. Just simply because you really just enjoy having multiple options, right? And I do agree, amethystine pinions was a bit of an auto take for me personally, and that's probably a good reason why it's gone. But I do think there's different ways to approach this, that you could still have it in the game and be an interesting choice out of the 4 of them, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, Lord of the Death Mages. So this has historically always been a better lore than the Lord of the Vampires, which kind of always annoyed me a lot. Because I didn't want to use it on my necromancers. I don't really like playing a lot of necromancers. I love playing a lot of vampires. Luckily, the Mortarks can also pick spells from the Death Mages.
Which is just Neferata and Manfred, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they also lost 3 spells, obviously, but the ones that they kept are probably the best ones anyway, or sort of the best ones. So Fading Vigor was also in the previous spell lords, casting value of 6, range of 18 inches. Pick 1 enemy unit within range and invisible. Subtract 1 from the attack characteristic of that unit's melee weapons to the minimum of 1 until your next hero phase. And on an unmodified 9+ to cast, subtract 2 instead of 1. Pretty good.
Yeah, it's interesting that it specifically doesn't double up the spell, which might have been modularly able to make it -2 on 1 unit, or you could split it and put it on 2 different units. Instead, with the unmodified 9+, you have to subtract 2, which against a lot of units isn't going to do anything since you can't go lower than 1. So interesting that's the buff. And the thing is, remember the order of casting is you say what spell you're doing, you roll for it, but you don't choose the target until you've seen what you've rolled. So as the next spell we'll end up talking about, that does make a difference, but maybe choosing the spell, you wouldn't choose it if you didn't know whether you're going to get the bonus off or not. For example, the next one we're talking about, Prison of Grief, goes up to double range. So you might feel a little bit like, well, I don't know if I want to cast this if it's only 12 inches.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that one, but this idea of the order that we do these things does matter. A lot of people will say, I'm choosing this unit ahead of time when they cast, but they technically don't have to. And they said they're going to choose that unit, but you can always undo that as long as that's just your intent, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. You can change your mind once you see what the role is.
Yeah.
So
I actually unlearned this from you, because I used to mention what unit I was casting it on always, and you kept mentioning to me the first game I think we played, you don't actually have to say it. So you're right, it does matter a lot sometimes.
Yeah, because whether they want to unbind it, you know, it might depend on which unit you commit to.
It really shows your hand if you mention what you're casting it on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, still a pretty good spell, even if you're double casting it.
Yeah.
Prison of Grief, casting value of 6, range of 12 inches, so a little bit shorter. Pick 1 enemy unit within range and visible to the caster. Until your next hero phase, the strike loss effect applies to that unit. On an unmodified 9+ to cast, increase the range of this spell to 24 inches. I took this one in my list that we're going to talk about because I really enjoy putting the strike loss effect on certain units. I don't know why, but it calms my mind a little bit, because I just understand that that's not a thing I have to worry about for a while. What I don't like about this spell is that it is quite short range, and I really don't like the buff spell, the buffed up version here on the 9+ to cast.
But yeah, if you think about what has to happen here, the units that can take this, I've written this down real quick. The units that count as death mages are Torgilius, the Chamberlain, so named character, the Necromancer. The Mortis Engine technically is a death mage, has the keyword, but isn't a caster, so I don't know what that's all about. And then you're getting Nagash, and then the 2 Mortarks, so Neferata and Monfred. The interesting thing is, if you're doing it from 12 inches, and you don't know for a fact you're going to get 24 inches on the unmodified 9, you're sitting there thinking, well, either my really fragile guy, let's say it's on one of the small dudes, like a Necromancer who doesn't want to be in combat, that Necromancer is already pretty close to the target. He's not trying to charge in and do anything. So you're casting this to put Strike Last on a unit in most likely at a time when you're kind of in trouble already for that hero. So, all right, fine. But then you've got Nagash, who's not bad in combat, and then the other 2, the big ones, the Mortarks, they're also not bad in combat. Maybe they're more likely to cast it if you're not going to get the unmodified 9+ off to extend the range. And they're like, well, I want to fight. I'm within 12 inches. Sure, I'm going to cast this. I feel like, to your point about the extra range, you don't know you're going to get it. And so maybe you have a unit that you'd rather choose that's between 12 and 24 inches, but you have to also have a backup unit that's within 12 that you'd be equally happy, or maybe happy enough, this going off against. It's a weird boost that you're getting there, and you don't get to know which one you're doing until after you've committed to casting the spell. So I feel like you're probably going to want to cast this on one of your fightier heroes, or use it with one of your fightier heroes, because that Necromancer is just not going to want to be within 12 inches unless he's got a big screen around him or something protecting him.
100% agreed. Yeah, and I mean, I see the problem here. When they were designing this rule, they were like, oh, guys, we decided that every spell is going to do something extra on 9+, but here we have a really static effect that is way too strong if we allow them to double it. So what are we going to do? We can't just add 1 or reduce it by 1 or whatever it is. So let's just double the casting range, right? Because that's the only thing that you can double here. So I understand why they did it, but it doesn't really feel good, especially because the range is already 12 inches. Maybe just make it 18 so the difference isn't as big.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, or making it a higher casting value on an unmodified 9, you can choose 2 units. You know, casting value 7 isn't crazy.
Yeah. Or can be unbound maybe on a 9.
Yeah, sure.
Would also be interesting. Anyway, Waste Away. This is a new one. So casting value of 6, range of 18 inches. Pick one enemy unit within range and invisible to the caster. Subtract 1 from the wound rolls and the damage characteristic of that unit's melee weapons to a minimum of 1, just for the melee weapons, not for the wound rolls, obviously. You can't go below 1 on a wound roll until your next hero phase. On unmodified 9+ to cast, you can pick 2 different targets. This is good. Yeah.
This used to be Decrepify, and I guess they changed it enough that they wanted to just change the name. Mm-hmm. So because Decrepify used to only target a hero and did some other stuff, but I feel like this is solid. Yeah, it's a weird combo of things to reduce, reducing one of the rolls and then reducing a fixed value. Usually you see either fixed values or the rolls themselves, since damage characteristic isn't rolled. Do we know how that works if your damage characteristic is a D3? Because they've often ruled that D3 rolls don't count as a specific number. So like there's a Stormcast thing that says like it does something. It's an artifact that does something against your damage rolls. And they ended up FAQing it that a D3 doesn't qualify since it doesn't have a fixed number.
Oh, that's
I don't know. I don't know if you roll first and then you reduce it 1, or it doesn't. It reduces 1 from something that doesn't have a value, and then I don't know what that means. Yeah, so I don't know.
probably played as a former, but
yeah,
I can see the point you're making.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Lord of the Death Mages, 3 very strong spells. A little bit weird as a combo here because both Fading Vigor and Waste Away are best used on elite units, or at least units with high damage characteristics or a lot of attacks. And Prison of Grief, as you mentioned, Ryan, is really weird on the Necromancer, so you're probably going to use it on the only the Mortarks here. There used to be a spell where you were reducing the hit rolls as well, which I thought would be more interesting to have on here as an extra, because that's good against anything and everything, while both Fading Vigor and Waste Away are very specifically tuned to more elite units.
Yeah, what's interesting, you see a theme here with the spells and just kind of a lot of the abilities that Soulblight has. A lot of it's about debuffing. There's not so much that's about buffing your guys, which, I mean, it does happen. I'm not saying there aren't positive things that happen for your army, but it seems like lore-wise, GW chose for more of nerfing the opponent, and instead of just doing D6 mortal wounds or whatever. There's not a whole lot of aggressive stuff. Besides just your units being good enough in combat or whatever. Yeah. For example, with zombies, just to give a regular example, they no longer do mortal wounds the way they used to. They do when they die, which is it's kind of a debuff, right? So they're gonna kill your guys, but then when they die, they do mortal wounds. It's a defensive kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. Okay, so did you already mention what we lost here?
It was, the spell you mentioned was Overwhelming Dread for -1 to hit. Spectral Grasp is gone, which was half movement around a terrain feature. I could see that being situational. And then Soul Harvest was a certain amount of mortal wounds, but and some amount of healing. But again, like I said, I feel like they're trying to edge away from doing direct damage in this book this time.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on to the sub-factions, so they really did a number on my pre-made PowerPoints here, because there was no way I could stick to the regular layout, because they reverted to 2nd edition vibes for the Soulblight sub-factions. So the entire point of the 3rd edition tomes was no longer are you bound to command traits and artifacts for your sub-faction. You can just choose one static sub-faction bonus ability and then add any of the command traits and artifacts on top of that. But I think they looked at Soulblight and were like, nah, let's just stick to the old approach and make it flavorful, because they really don't mix well or something. I don't really understand. You probably have a more philosophical approach to this, but yeah, we're back to sub-faction specific traits and artifacts.
I like it when they have exceptions. You're right that most of the books work the way you described, where the sub-factions are independent of their command traits and stuff. But cities is unquestionably going to be of this model, right? Because each city, there's 11 of them. It doesn't make sense to mix and match artifacts and command traits. And then what's it called? Slaanesh just came out and it has the same thing. So yeah, I think this is here to stay. I don't think this is. I think it's an intentional exception within 3rd edition, and it's done for flavor reasons.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go over all of these sub-factions, and as I said, instead of looking at the rules and then the artifacts separately, we're looking at them per sub-faction. So for Legion of Blood here, Legion of Blood still unlocks Black Knights as battle line, which I've always found a little bit strange, because it doesn't really match well with the name, but it fits in with the lore, but you have to know the entire lore of the Legion of Blood. But you get 2 rules that were in that look very much like the rules that were in the White Dwarf. So first of all, you get Unparalleled Expertise. Friendly Legion of Blood vampire heroes within 3 inches of an enemy unit add 1 to their attacks. for all melee weapons, and those heroes are more than 3 inches away from enemy units, they add 1 to their casting, dispelling, and unbinding rolls, which is pretty good.
Yeah, this is just such a great rule.
I love it.
I think the only way you used to be able to get the casting bonuses was in Virkos before. That was the main way you got it. And so now it's been moved into subfaction. They clearly have been trying to boost since the White Dwarf update. I feel like Legion of Blood originally wasn't that strong, and then they kept giving it things, and now I think it's the strongest subfaction.
Yep.
Now this is only vampire heroes, so sorry for the noise. I've got construction going on. That's not me starting.
We're back to it.
Yeah, sorry. Oh my god. Jonas, do you want to wait?
It's quite alright for now. It's only in the background when you're talking. So when you're not, it's actually quite fine. So let's keep going for a bit.
Okay. So again, it's only vampire heroes, which of course you can max out at 6. This of course is making you want to focus on your like really tanky, fighty vampire heroes. You're not really taking it on some. Maybe it doesn't work as well to give it to some small dude. And keep in mind, a good chunk of almost every what's it called? Cursed City hero, the Virkos guys are fixed to Virkos, so they'll never get this, even if they might have a buff or 2 that you want to use in this. Yeah. So you're max getting it on 6 different units, but it's still really strong, especially if you're really depending on your casting and dispelling stuff for against magic heavy armies.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so this is super flavorful. Before, after the White Dwarf update actually, but before the new book, you could also get one of these perks on your vampires. You had to choose whether they were more magically inclined or more combat efficient. But now they just, they're just in the middle of that fight. If they're smelling blood, they go ham, and if they're not, they're focusing on their casting, which I find very flavorful and immensely enjoyable as a rule. Okay, you also get 2 extra heroic actions, and they are very good. So you got premeditated bloodshed. Pick 1 Legion of Blood vampire hero. So do keep in mind here, it's all Legion of Blood, obviously. So it wouldn't work if you're picking Vordry, for example, because he's bound to Castellai. Until the end of this turn, ward rolls cannot be made for wounds or mortal wounds caused by attacks made by this hero. This is so juicy because if you're using this on a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, that also affects his mount. So that's quite a lot of mortal wounds, especially quite a lot of wounds, especially on the charge, with them doing -3 rent and 3 damage on the charge, and then their claw attacks being quite a big damage dealer as well. You usually had to bank on good ward saves if you were targeting a hero, or the enemy had to bank on that at least. And now it's just bad luck for them. We premeditated on this bloodshed thing.
Yeah, you're going to hear us talking about the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon for 2 big reasons. One, he's the biggest heavy hitter guy that we have. That, for the second reason, doesn't have a subfaction keyword. And so he's just a really good option to be taking for getting a lot of these buffs that make your guys better. And turning off the wounds and mortal wounds can make a really big difference for certain builds, especially against armies that have either if you're like a Nurgle type army, got a board wide 5+, or just a hero that you need to get rid of for battle tactics. So definitely good.
Yeah. Yeah, as you mentioned, the Vampire Lords on Zombie Dragon, if you're just starting off with the Soulblight journey here, and you're wondering what to buy, that's definitely a mall that you want. Even if they're gonna FAQ the hell out of this book at some point, there's really no time that he's not being good.
And you can still buy the Flesh Eater Courts Start Collecting boxes, which have that's where you get that model along with Vargeists. So especially if you have interest in playing Feck, there's no reason not to just hoard those boxes until they get rid of them.
Yeah. Though Vargeists aren't really amazing, but apart from that, yeah, and you could even use the ghouls as some sort of zombies, I guess, if you mix them into a zombie unit or something with a little bit of modifications.
I actually really like Vargeists, and they can be battle line in 2 subfactions, so I'm actually pretty down for them. But
right. please convince me later on, because those were my favorite models back in the Vampire Count days.
Yeah, and they're good in FEC too, as their FEC versions as well, or at least they currently are decent in FEC. So we'll have to see what happens with the new ones.
Okay, so Immortal Majesty, such an awesome name. Pick one Legion of Blood vampire hero. Until the end of this turn, your opponent must spend 2 command points instead of 1 to issue the all-out defense and inspiring presence commands to units within 12 inches of that hero. Again, very good, especially if your unit, if the thing that you're targeting doesn't have a ward save, for example. The all-out defense and inspiring presence things are usually the things that keep your opponent's units standing in front of your big ass monster heroes. So this is also very strong. And remember, with the current season of the GHB, this might, if you're watching this later on, this might not be a rule anymore. But if you're going second, you could do 2 of these things on the same guy, right?
Yeah, keep in mind though that it's gonna have to be on a GC, so your big dudes, you know, and if you do that, it means that you can't do 1 on that GC and then 1 on someone else. Yeah. So, and the other thing to keep in mind here too is that the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon is already turning off Inspiring Presence. Yeah. Yeah, this one's more for all-out defense, I think.
Yeah, or Neferata.
Sure, her too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so amazing rules here. First of all, super flavorful. I really think they did right by Legion of Blood. Finally, it was one of my favorites, if not my favorite subfaction for a long time, just because I think a lot of us, especially the ones that came from Warhammer Fantasy, are here for the vampires. And we're still waiting for a good Vampire Lord on foot. It's going to happen at some point, but it was not this book. And this kind of brings me back to the old Vampire Count days. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I'm looking through what we lost here. And there was something that was mainly for Death Rattle units, wholly within 12 or 18 inches of Vampire Heroes. It's that had ignoring negative to hit and wound modifiers. I mean, that's just such a specific thing that's not amazing. So I definitely feel like that's less important. That said, none of these abilities that we just looked at are benefiting your non-vampire heroes directly. Every single thing about this, like you just alluded to, is focusing on Hero Hammer. Yep. Which is great, and that's definitely a build that you want to do. And keep in mind, we're going to talk. I feel like it's smart to talk about Neferata a little bit while we're talking about the subfaction and all of their like representative people. But Neferata is very much needed to boost Legion of Blood. She has 3 abilities, if I'm not mistaken, that only work on Legion of Blood. So she's kind of an auto take here, and so I feel like she's kind of a battle trait, implied battle trait for the subfaction that we should also talk about here.
Yeah. They did an interesting number on all the Mortarchs here, where they made their abilities more specific to their legions. So you can still take them in different legions, but they don't really mesh well with other legions anymore. To the point where I would even say that none of the Mortarchs, except for maybe Vordry, really fit into a different legion anymore. But on the other hand, now they're just so much better in their own legion that you really don't want to leave home without them if you're playing one of those legions.
Yeah, interestingly, all 5 of the quote-unquote Mortarchs, there are 2 that are only Mortarchs, but 5 of the leaders of their subfactions, so that would be Belladama, Laukavai, and Prince Vordry, who aren't officially Mortarchs. They used to have War Master being a general, even if they're not your chosen general, only in their subfaction. But strangely enough, in a book that's leaning towards these guys being more specific in their own subfaction, that ability is just generic. Now they're War Masters outside of their own subfaction, which is interesting. So you can take Vordry in Legion of Blood, and he'll still count as a general, even though he's not in Legion of Blood and not your chosen general. Yeah. So that's interesting. That got reversed the other direction. Yeah,
that is actually quite interesting indeed. Okay, let's move on to artifacts and command traits. So 3 command traits here: Tailor Downfall, Game Hunter, and Doomed Minions. Quite texty, all of them. So after deployment, but before the first battle round begins, pick 1 enemy hero on the field. That's the strike loss effect applies to that unit while it is within 3 inches of this general. Do you want to talk about these separately, or should I just cover all three and then we'll talk about them all together?
One quick note is they all have to do with Hero Hammer, and they're all after deployment before first battle round begins abilities, which is interesting that that's how it works.
And all within 3 inches of the general.
Yeah, it's wanting your general to be in combat.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so you also got Game Hunter. So again, after deployment, but before the first battle round begins, pick one enemy monster that is not a hero. This is quite big. The attacks characteristic of that unit's melee weapons is 1 while that unit is within 3 inches of the general. That is a big debuff. Ivania or Evia or whatever the new character's name is has this just as a generic thing. But having this in Legion of Blood is quite cool, especially because Evia is Virgos. Yeah. Yeah,
you could technically still use her for it, though. So you could have 2 instances of this on the battlefield.
Yeah. And then you've got the Doom Minions one, which is, in my opinion, probably the best out of the 3. So again, after deployment and before the first battle round, you pick up to D3 enemy units that are not heroes or monsters. Attacks made with melee weapons that target those units score a hit on an unmodified 2-up while they are within 3 inches of this general. I say this is, in my eyes, the best one because this also affects or helps your own units. So it doesn't actually only just affect your general. They have to be within 3 inches of the general, but once they are, all other units that are fighting that target are also hitting on 2s.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever I'm looking at command traits, I'm always looking for things that boost my army, not just the general. As much as it's tempting to say I want this one guy to go ham in combat, I usually am thinking more about how can I treat this as a battle trait that's affecting everyone. As such, I also Game Hunter the second one. You're choosing an enemy monster that's not a hero, and I feel like that's really risky as a command trait because a lot of times you're going to play games where someone doesn't even have a monster at all, let alone a monster that's not a hero. So I'm less inclined to pick that one. But Strike Last effect is also in boosting your own guys, right? So you're picking one enemy hero. Is it specifically worded? No, it can be a hero with a monster too. And so your other units that are within combat are also getting to fight first. So I would say either the first one or the last one.
Yeah, I agree. The only reason why I didn't pick Taylor Downfall for my lists, spoilers, is because it targets a hero. And sometimes, I mean, usually, I'm gonna be honest here, usually I'm not scared of heroes the most when I'm playing against general tournament-y lists.
Yeah, we had a moment in AOS where the phrase "just shoot the heroes" was a thing. And the idea behind it, of course, being that if you take out the heroes, then there's less synergy in the army and blah, blah, blah. I actually generally find, as a, I guess, more competitive-oriented player, that you're better off taking off their big hammer units than you are taking out their heroes, unless their heroes are one of the big hammers.
Yeah.
So, as such, in the Doom Minions, you're getting D3 units, which, of course, you don't know how many it's going to be, but there's going to be D3 units that aren't heroes or monsters on the field for you to choose, and that's pretty cool. And unmodified hit, I've never even seen this before, scores a hit on an unmodified 2+. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that is very good. It almost feels like that subfaction ability from Heartwood from Sylvaneth, where you're picking quarries and you add +1 to wound rolls. It's obviously less effective, but it's still quite cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, it's all based off getting your general up in there, so don't take it on some small dude.
Yeah, I have to say, when I was building my Legion of Blood list, I checked the core rule command traits first, because these ones were so specific, and even though I love Hero Hammer the most, it's as you said, right? You want an ability that benefits your entire army usually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, Legion of Blood is built for Hero Hammer, so why not lean in a bit?
Exactly. Okay, so on to the artifacts. There's 3 again, so that's a recurring theme throughout the subfactions. So Amulet of Screams, roll a d6 each time an enemy within 18 inches of the bearer successfully casts a spell that is not unbound. On a 3+, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds after a spell is resolved. Keeping in mind that most spells are a range of 18 inches, I expect this to get triggered quite often, but then the question remains, are you rolling a 3 up often enough for it to be useful? What do you think about the Amulet of Screams? Because this is really one that I wanted your input on. At first glance, I actually thought it was quite strong, but I'm actually not sure now.
I mean, come on, like D3 mortal wounds on a lot of casters is, especially if they're a multicaster. Keeping in mind that Arcane Bolt no longer lets casters get an extra spell to cast, so I guess that's nerfed a little bit. But I feel if you play against a magic heavy meta, this is not a bad idea. Especially, again, remember a lot of your blood you're throwing into the middle of the battlefield.
Yeah.
So they're going to be within 18 inches, unless they're playing super defensively with that caster. And it's every time they cast a spell. So imagine you're going up against Kairos or something. Mm-hmm. That's not a bad amount of mortal wounds to be throwing back, or Teclis even. Yep. Granted, no, Teclis doesn't get he'll get the protection of Teclis, but he's not getting the splash back.
No, this would really do a number on any Lumineth army.
Yeah.
this would wreck us.
I think 3+ is reliable enough. I'm not complaining about a 3+.
Yeah. Okay. Orb of Enchantment, once per battle. I already don't like the start of that. At the start of the combat phase, pick one enemy hero within 3 inches of the bearer and roll 1d6. On a 3+, that hero cannot be picked to fight in that phase. Quite strong though, still. Not gonna lie. But once per battle, ugh. I understand it's way too strong to do it every phase or every turn. But I really don't like once per battle abilities that then also need to trigger on a 3+.
Yeah, and this is leaning in again even more into the Hero Hammer stuff. The Amulet of Screams is much more a buff for your whole army, because it's just you don't have to be within combat with that hero. So yeah, I feel like this is more just Hero Hammer, and you might not even need it. It's functionally like strike last infinitely, so like we're to the point where you can't fight. But yeah, I think it's more for the lulz.
Yeah, if it was targeting an enemy unit, then maybe I could see a point here to be made. But an enemy hero, once again, there are certain heroes that you really want to shut down, like let's say Archeon, for example. But just imagine expecting this to go off on Archeon, so you have a chance in taking him down, and then you fail the roll.
Yeah, I feel like it should be a 2+.
Yeah,
if it's once per battle.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, and then Cloak of Mists and Shadows. I left out the Shadows part here because when I was making these PowerPoint slides, I was still focused on every artifact fitting on one line, and then I got into this other subfaction. I was like, oh, fuck it. But it's actually Cloak of Mists and Shadows. Ignore modifiers, both positive and negative, to save rolls for attacks that target the bearer. Thoughts?
It's fantastic if you have a 3+ save.
Yep.
No one has a 2+ save, which would be the best version of it. But if you don't have CPs to blow in all-out defense, or you need to use it on someone else, this is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they've got weighted dice, it's bad. But because that 2-up really goes a long way. If you could get it up to 2-up and they've got a million shots with no rend, then that's way better. But otherwise, a 3-up unrendable is great.
This also just works so well with the hunger.
Yeah, how do you mean?
Well, once again, here I go saying it again. If you put this on a Vampire Lord and a Zombie Dragon, the problem that I've always had with the Zombie Dragons is they are quite good, but they're also prone to, if you roll 2 1s or something on their lands, their damage just disappears, I'd say. And then you were kind of stuck usually into a unit that can blender you throughout a game, throughout a turn or two maybe. But now with you being unmodifiable, and let's be honest here, almost everything that is scary has a -1 to rend. So this is basically saving you a CP to stay on your 3+ save anyway. a zombie dragon has a lot of wounds, so the chances of you surviving a round of combat or a turn of combat are quite big with the Cloak of Mist and Shadows. And then now that the hunger is actually buffed and you can heal more wounds than you actually could before, because before you could only heal D3, I think, and now it's just up to 6 of the number of wounds that you've done. Add this on top of, for example, Vile Transference or something, and they're actually hitting quite hard and also surviving for quite a long time.
Yeah, while we're here, let's just talk about the hunger, because it's the same across everyone. It, instead of healing at the end of the combat phase, it heals immediately after you fought, which is a big difference. It doesn't, so now it's based off of how many wounds you did. And the trick there is, before it could have done, like, let's say you only did 1 wound this phase, but you did kill something. So technically the D3 or D6 with Neferata before would have been better. But most of the time it's going to end up playing out that it's better if your big unit does some amount of killing or wounds. It caps at 6, like you said. For some heroes, they didn't even write that in because it's not even possible to need to heal 6.
Yeah.
A 5 wound hero can't. But in general, it's just a lot better. I'd say actually the biggest thing is the timing.
Yeah.
Even if it just changed the D3, left the D3 and they changed the timing, it still would have helped a lot more. But waiting until you might be dead is too late, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. The timing is better for prolonged fights or for fights where you're already hurt, but worse if you're going in without any wounds taken. Yeah,
but I mean, you're already getting to lift a certain number of things anyway, which is implicitly reducing the amount of fighting back, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so all in all, I think 2 very good artifacts and 1 that is probably not something that you're going to consider, especially if you're losing out on choosing one of the other 2. Okay,
yeah, I agree.
So that is Legion of Blood. Moving on to Legion of Knights. Wait.
Hold on. I think it really is handy to talk about Neferata's Legion of Blood things real quick.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So I've got it pulled up. She's got 3 abilities that are fixed to Legion of Blood, and we can talk about other things with her later if you want. One of them is subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target friendly Legion of Blood units wholly within 12 inches of her. So that is making your army more defensive. She's already a battle trait unto herself.
Yeah.
Anyone hanging out with her, she's basically Frostheart Phoenixing it, but with a hit. Which is great. Mortarch of Blood. At the end of deployment, before determining control of objectives, you can pick up 3 friendly Legion of Blood units on the battlefield and also Neferata, and then you can reset them up. I don't want to use redeploy because that has its own meaning, and wholly within your territory. So basically, you can kind of psych someone out. You can deploy your stuff, pick them back up, and then put them back down wherever else you want to adjust to what you saw what they did in their deployment, which is fantastic. And then her spell, Dark Mist, casting value 6, range of 12. Pick 1 friendly Legion of Blood unit wholly within range, invisible to the master. Ignore negative modifiers to save rolls for attacks that target that unit. That used to be for... I don't know if it was Legion of Blood previously. I don't think it was. But that's still the same spell she had before.
Yeah, it wasn't keyworded, but it was the same spell otherwise.
And so this is not ethereal. It's just negative modifiers to save rolls, which is fantastic. Now, keep in mind, if you take her outside of Legion of Blood, she can still do it to herself. All 3 of those things. Yeah. Which is still great, but it's just not the same. She is a walking of all the Mortarchs, of all of the leaders of their subfaction. She is the one that I think is the most auto-take in her own faction, because she's just benefiting her faction so much. Those 3 traits are fantastic. So to me, that feels like a battle trait and not really something on someone's war scroll.
Yeah, it is so good. And the I think it's fine that they keyworded the spell to Legion of Blood, because before that was one of the reasons why you would take her in different sub-factions, and now us being, I wouldn't say forced, but heavily motivated to stick the leaders in their own sub-factions. It just feels so rewarding running them now, right?
Yeah, I mean, Legion of Blood is definitely the strongest, I think, in the long run, especially if you're planning on taking her, which I don't understand why you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We good?
Yep.
All right. On to the Legion of Night. So Manfred has been up to his usual shenanigans. He hasn't destroyed the Age of Sigmar worlds now, but he has added extra battle line, I think, because Felbats weren't battle line in Legion of Night in the first book, were they?
No, they weren't, and I actually like the upgrade that they've received. So, and I like all flying armies. So this was on the surface already a really cool direction for Legion of Night to be heading.
Yeah, the idea here with Legion of Night is really something. Well, in the lore, Manfred is the Mortarch Nagash turns to when he needs something to be dealt with quickly, thoroughly, and brutally. So if he needs someone to make an example of quickly and in a mysterious, dark way, then he turns to Legion of Night, and they really hammered down on that theme here with the monstrous action and the encouraging you to take things that have wings.
Yeah, I mean it's in principle the bats version of like vampires in traditional lore can turn into bats, and this one leans the most into that ability.
Yeah. Okay, so Ageless Cunning is their generic rule, and I really love this one, but I love all movement shenanigans kind of thing. So once per turn, during the enemy charge phase, after an enemy unit finishes a charge move, you can pick one friendly Legion of Night unit within 12 inches of that enemy unit, and more than 3 inches away from all enemy units. That unit can attempt to charge. So basically this is a counter charge. If you've played with the Glotkin, this is very much like that ability. It is so cool. This will reward good players more than it will beginners, obviously, because you really need to plan ahead. But that's also in the name, right? It's Ageless Cunning. So I just love it. I really like it a lot. Maybe it's not as strong as I'm making it out to be, but I just love the possibilities here. How do you feel about it?
If you think about like what needs to take place here, one concept you can kind of think about abilities that are in Warscrolls is that you can read it as exactly as it is for what it says on the tin, but you can also take it as what it's disincentivizing. So if you're a smart strategic player, your goal here is going to be to turn this off as much as possible by trying to tag units as far away from other units that aren't in combat so that they won't be able to get that charge. It doesn't mean they automatically get to fight. They have to still roll 2d6, right? So if you're like 11 inches away instead of like 6 inches away, that makes a big difference. So what mainly I think what this is going to end up doing, if someone has control over it, is forcing your opponent, who's the non-Soulblight player, to have to play in such a way that they are staying outside of 12 inches or as far as from 12 inches possible. You can use that to your advantage as the Soulblight player, or you can use it to your advantage as the other person, but it is putting you in a weird situation where it's kind of like an Unleash Hell, like you said, a counter charge. Yeah. It's kind of like an Unleash Hell for charging. You have to be smart about where you move your units. And then, of course, the thing you can do as the Soulblight player, if you want to make sure you get to use it, is putting a couple other units around your units that are going to get charged, like your big, juicy, meaty distraction carnifex that they want to be charging with. Well, put your other units nearby so that they can't turn this thing off. So there's a lot of interactivity built into this rule, and it's the kind of thing, if I were playing at a tournament with this army, I'd want to try to make it very clear that this is on the table, because even the psychological impact of this could work to your benefit if you know how to use it right. Yeah, and remember, this works so well with their resurrection mechanic. As I mentioned when we were discussing that mechanic specifically, I kind of talked about the trait here. You being able to, let's say, resummon 10 skeletons in front of one of your zombie dragons, for example, or maybe a terror guys, I don't know, and your opponent charges into it, there's really no way for them to avoid you getting into that unit as well if you've placed it right in front of that zombie dragon. And with the zombie dragon specifically, you could just inch it right up to the back of the base of a small 25 mil base, still getting in range with your lance, for example, and most of your attacks, and your opponent might not actually be able to hit you back. Or even better is you place them just if it's like these Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with the lance that gets better on the charge, is putting him intentionally just outside of 3 inches after they make the charge, and then getting the charge so you get the charge bonus on the lance.
Yeah.
So that's even better than being just in 3 inches and not getting bonus.
Yeah, I meant if after you made that charge, you move him right up to the base. That's what I meant.
Right up to the base of what? I'm not following.
Of the screen that you've put in front.
Well, you still have to land within a ½ inch.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah, yeah. So you could maybe tag one and then have the screen partially cover your base, for example. But yeah, I understand where you're coming from here. Yeah. Okay.
It depends on how the battlefield's laid out.
Yeah,
but yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so heroic actions. There's only one for the Legion of Night Vampire heroes, but it is quite flavorful, and it was actually something that was on Manfred's War Scrolls, sort of. So you get to pick one vampire hero more than 3 inches from all enemy units. You remove that unit from the field and set it up again more than 9 inches from all enemies. That hero cannot move in the following movement phase. So Manfred had this at the start of the combat phase, or no, whenever he was activated to fight, whenever he was chosen to fight, I think. Which made him an excellent screen and objective capper. This is still quite cool, I feel. It is good for setting up your units, as you've mentioned, not redeploying, but resetting up your units or getting to specific parts of the battlefield. This is basically just a guaranteed teleport. Right? Yeah,
his ability was kind of a little
too strong,
a little too wily, and too obvious what you should do with it.
Yeah.
So I guess it kind of balances things out a little. I would definitely say Manfred got nerfed a little bit, and then moving it here is cool that other people can use it too. But yeah, and of course, if you have like a GC, they could do this if you have the second battle round or the bottom half of the battle round, and then you could do something else in addition, which might be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you think about GCs, if you look at how popular Tunnel Master is as a trait, then you know that this is just very strong, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then you mentioned Unleash Hell, Ryan. Well, would you love to unleash hell with a Zombie Dragon or Terrorgeist? Because if you would, I have something to tempt you with. You could have your opponents run into the jaws of death here. You get to pick one enemy unit within 6 inches, so it is like an Unleash Hell that made a charge move in this phase, and roll 2d6 plus 3 if the charging unit is within ½ inch of this monster. So if they charge you, you get plus 3 to the roll. If the roll is greater than the unmodified charge roll, so this is quite tricky, you can attack with Pestilential Breath or Death Streak in this phase and must target that enemy unit. Very cool.
Yeah, so let's think it through for a second. The Pestilential Breath on the Zombie Dragon has been changed. Was it previously? Let me check real quick. It was previously it was 1 attack. Now it's D6 attacks. It's arguably gotten worse, but now that it's got more attacks, you're having to roll higher than the charge value, and then you're getting -1 to hit because it's not actually an Unleash Hell. Mm-hmm. That's good. The Terrorgeist, however, is just an ability. It doesn't have to roll for anything. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because on a normal Unleash Hell, it goes off automatically, and then you have -1 to hit. So you still have a certain gatekeeping mechanism there. Its gatekeeping mechanism is rolling higher than the charge roll.
Yeah.
And then you still have to roll all of your normal gatekeeping mechanisms, but not with -1 to hit, which on the Terrorgeist is easy because it has its own weird, the Death Streak has to do with comparing the Bravery, which is its own thing. So I do feel like this is cool. And I think it might not go off as often as we think it will. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that it's a monstrous rampage, which happens at the end of the charge phase, and the unit that's charged in the neighborhood of this Zombie Dragon or Terrorgeist might have done so at the beginning of the charge phase, and then you have like 5 more charges that have to happen. So what you need to do is remember actively remember and with your opponent what they rolled as the unmodified charge roll.
Yeah.
Because it's not right after it happens. So if you know this might be on your list of things you want to do as monstrous rampages, you need to actively and proactively remind them what they just rolled. Because if they roll at the beginning of the thing and you're keeping it in mind, but they're not, they might say, well, I don't remember. I don't have any proof that that's what it was, and you don't either. You get what I mean about the timing on this?
Yeah, that is such a good point.
So it just keep in mind, these are little things that are going to come up and for some feel bad type moments if you're not thinking it through what it implies.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I wouldn't pick this as the if it was my only monstrous rampage, I wouldn't pick this ability probably on a fight where my zombie dragon or terrorgeist was actually involved in. I would usually go for roar anyway, but as a second monstrous action, or just as an unleash hell kind of thing here, if they're not even tagging me with it, this is cool. This is good.
Yeah. Before we move on to the artifacts command traits, it might be good to point out that one of the big things we lost here in Legion of Night was flavorfully one of my favorite things about it formerly, which was that you got to do, in addition to the summonable units that can go in the grave sites and deep strike that way, you also could just do 1 out of every 2 units, or for every unit that's on the battlefield, the normal kind of reserve thing for all Legion of Night units. That's gone now. There's no way to do that anymore. I will say, however, Legion of Night is the only place to do a null deploy in Soulblight, because there's a command trait, as we'll see, that we can give to one thing that can make it null deep strike itself, and then all Vargeist deep strike by default if you want to, and really cool, all zombie dragons, but not the one that's ridden. Only the zombie dragons that are by themselves, not with a rider. They get to deep strike as well. So you can actually do a full null deploy list in Legion of Blood, even though you can't do the one. Oh, sorry, Legion of Night. Yeah, even though you can't do the 1 for every 1 deep strike, which I think is cool. I've actually made a list for it. I'm not using it today, but I don't know if it's actually good. So.
If you want to know Ryan's list, find us in the Discord.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So the command traits. Above suspicion, the bait, which used to be one of the generic rules for Legion of Night, or something in the vicinity of it at least, and then unbending well. So above suspicion, during the deployment, instead of setting up your general, on the battlefield, you can place it in reserves. If you do so, at the end of your movement phase, you can set up this general more than 9 inches from all enemy units.
Yep, that's what I was just referring to.
Yeah.
There's only one other unit that can Lady Annika from Virko. She won't get Legion of Blood, or Night, sorry, but she will. She does have it on her war scroll that she can do a deep strike as well. So this gives you 1 extra thing that can do it if you want to go full null deploy.
Mm-hmm. Then the bait, while this general is on the field, add 1 to save rolls and ward rolls. That is a big buff for attacks that target friendly Legion of Night summonable units in the first battle rounds.
Yeah, so that's impacting your heroes that are summonable now too, which I guess is some extra buff. And then, I mean, +1 save and ward is definitely, especially the ward, is cool. It depends on how you're trying to play, how you're trying to play this army. The Fellbats are summonable, right? But the Vargeist are not. So as far as battle line options, if you're going with Fellbats, they will benefit from this. Mm-hmm. But which is good because they're kind of glass cannon-y. They will stay alive. It gives you some time to get into your opponent. And Jonas, as you just saw with our game with Cities, where I played Tempestside, where I had +1 save on the first turn, you weren't very happy about how tanky I was with the.
I was not. No.
Yeah, that can make a big difference, especially if you can get in on turn 1. If you're not, it's kind of a non-bow, as we say.
Well, I think before, if I remember correctly, you only got this benefit if you were in your own deployment zone or something, or that might actually have been one of the first edition versions of that rule. But it didn't come up at all in my games usually. Now you could potentially put, let's say, skeletons or zombies in a graveside, deploy them out of the graveside in the first turn, and then they would be on a 5+ ward save. And if you're putting out 60 zombies right in the face of your opponents during a turn 1 from a well-placed graveside, and they have a 5+ ward, your opponent is gonna need to chew through the entire unit for quite a long time.
Yeah. Especially if you have a unit that doesn't have to make a charge move or something.
Yeah.
Like a 6-inch pylon. The zombies don't have that anymore.
The wolves.
Yeah. The bait, so originally was +1 save for attacks that were only for Death Rattle and Dead Walkers.
Yeah.
And it didn't include the ward, but it had nothing to do with your territory. Maybe that was from a previous book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, and then Unbending Will. Models in friendly Legion of Knights summonable units count as 2 models instead of 1 for the purposes of contesting objectives, while they are wholly within 12 inches of this general. When I started reading this command trait, when I was going through the leaks, I thought, oh, this is going to be the one. And then I read, while they are wholly within 12 inches of this general. Which is not great, but do keep in mind, you can always redeploy your general with a heroic action.
Yeah, redeploy. Oh yeah, with that. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, reset it up.
Yeah. And redeploy as well.
Yeah.
And you can also take the big pie plate Vampire Lord for a bigger bubble.
Mm-hmm. The dragon.
Yeah. I mainly, well, the problem is, my thing is, I really wanted Legion of Night to focus on the bat stuff, and everything you keep reading doesn't really make the bats or Vargeist that much more obvious, because bats are summonable, but I don't know if you're kind of taking a trade-off to get them to count as 2 models on an objective when you could have just been taking skeletons or zombies,
mm-hmm.
And getting more bodies for cheaper. Vargeist aren't benefiting from this at all. So I feel like they kind of dropped the ball here a little bit with wanting it to lean into the flyy stuff, but then not changing their mind, you know?
Well,
I know you felt like Legion of Night was pretty strong, but I feel like at least lore-wise, it's not quite doing what it wants to do.
Well, actually, oh God, I hate saying that phrase. Yeah, actually. Well, Manfred's lore-wise, he uses Death Rattle units and zombie units just to bait in opponents into the woods or in unfavorable positions and then flanks them with the flying stuff. So in that kind of vibe, you can still imagine wanting some foot folk in a Legion of Night roster or list. But I do agree with you, if you want to go full flyers, there's really nothing here in the command traits that enforces that idea. I do feel that debate is good as it is. If it rewards you for using smaller units on foot, but then I find a little bit of a pity that that Unbending Will also motivates you for running that kind of list. How cool would it have been if this was not bound to a certain range and would just say Felbats and Vargeists count as double the amount of models?
Oh yeah.
That would be so cool.
That would be great. Yeah, I get what you mean by the bait and the actual lore. I just, as a person who values mobility so much and doesn't like playing horde armies, this kind of starts to take away from what I wanted this action to be. But that's okay.
Yeah, and neither Felbats nor Vargeists are objectively great scrolls or something. Like, I could still be convinced for Vargeists being all right. But I don't think you can make it a point that it's an excellent war scroll, and you definitely cannot do that for Felbats anymore, because they are way more expensive now than they were previously.
Well, they definitely got better since the last book, Felbats.
Yeah, they got better, but they also are way more expensive.
All right. Well, let's talk about when we get there.
Yeah. Okay, and so artifacts. Shard of Night, hero. God, a cloak. I always read as chiropractor cloak, but it's not that. And then Morbek's Claw, which was a staple in all my Legion of Night lists, and I played Legion of Night a lot because I just love Manfred. Sure. So Shard of Night is a little bit akin to the the Cloak of Mist and Shadows from Legion of Blood. So ignore negative modifiers to save rolls, but it's only for attacks made with missile weapons that target a bearer. So at first glance this is quite alright, but then if you start thinking about it, a lot of decent shooting is already doing mortal wounds on top of it anyway, so not amazing. Then the cloak here, if the unmodified hit roll for an attack with a melee weapon that targets the bearer is 1, the attacker suffers 1 mortal wound after all of its attacks have been resolved. It's alright, but again, it doesn't really blow my socks off or anything.
Yeah.
And then Morbek's Claw, and this is one that I really like. In your hero phase, if the bearer is more than 3 inches from all enemies, you can use the Claw. If you do so, add 2 to the casting rolls for friendly Legion of Night Wizards wholly within 12 inches of the bearer until your next hero phase. However, the bearer cannot make a normal move, run, retreat, or attempt charges until your next hero phase. This is great on the lone Vampire Lords or Necromancer on foot that you're bringing, and that is just there to buff your army and do his own spell.
Yeah,
really
and
cool.
then you use that heroic action to have him teleport.
Yes. Oh, I didn't even think of that.
So it keeps him from moving, but then he can move and then just put his buffs right where you need, right before the magic phase, right?
Yeah.
Or right before you start casting. Now I see. Here's the thing: is when I built my Null Vampire Lord with the command trait.
You dropped off there for a little bit. When you built your null deploy list?
Yeah, when I built my null deploy list, I had the Zombie Dragon Vampire Lord. I had him with the null deploy command trait, and I was looking at these artifacts, and though I do agree this artifact is my favorite, it didn't make sense in my list because I don't want him to stop moving. Mm-hmm. And so I actually went for a universal artifact for +1 to wound on his lance.
Oh, yeah.
Just to make him more punchy. So that's a problem when you only have 3 artifacts to choose from in a subfaction like this, and none of them are like really obvious for maybe what you're trying to do with a list that's kind of mobile, because none of these really lean into, like we were talking, Legion of Night stuff in particular. Like, why is this giving extra casting? It's not even a casting subfaction per se. Now it becomes one, but it's just I really feel like they kind of missed the ball on the command traits and artifacts here for the lore of the subfaction.
Yeah, but again, in the lore, actually. God.
Yeah, go for it.
In the lore, Manfred always brings his lackey necromancers that he despises, but just lets them do his dirty work. So the entire thing here is that he brings along these necromancers that are guarded by undead, death rattle, and zombie units, and he uses them as bait. He actually doesn't mind them dying, and then he swoops in, literally. With his Vargeist, his Fellbats, his Zombie Dragons or Vargeist, Terrorgeist to finish the job. So there's always been that aspect of Legion of Night casting to it, though.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's not what it seems to be turning on with the rest of it.
I do agree that if it would be cool that this was the thing, right? That you had a fast-moving all-flyer army. That I agree that it would be cool, but it still sticks to the lore that they originally had for it. But I do agree that there's too little options to go the route that you want to go, I would say. Yeah. They really still want you to take a bit of everything in Legion of Night.
Right, yeah. And before we move on, and we're still talking about Manfred, the one ability he has that only affects Legion of Night units is the Sword of Unholy Power. It makes him fight in a specific order with his weapons, and then Geistvor is the last one. And until the end of the phase, add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by friendly Legion of Night summonable units while they're holier than 12 inches of that unit if any models were slain by wounds caused by that Geist Force itself, not any of his other weapons. How do you feel about that ability?
I hate it. Do keep in mind, Manfred is one of my favorite models, and I don't like what they've done to my boy.
Yeah, they nerfed him quite a bit, right?
Yes, I understand that they nerfed the movement shenanigans that he had, because I do agree that he was almost an auto-include in any Soulblight list, not even just Legion of Night, which I never like. If a specific sub-faction bound unique hero is included in every list, there's something wrong with that unit, or that war scroll at least. But I really don't see why they had to nerf the sword as well, or the Geist sword thing as well, because not only does it punish, or is it nerfed now for Manfred himself, but also it only just targets summonable units now.
Well, it was always summonable. I'm looking at it right now, but it was Soulblight. Yeah.
Huh.
The other ability was the command ability that he lost as well. That gave a bubble of
that's the one. Yeah.
And that's the one everyone used. They would turn it on,
yes,
and then teleport him, and then put people in bubbles. He lost that, so that's the biggest nerf he got, and he went down in points too, so a little bit.
Yeah, but still quite expensive, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like he's an auto take at all. I think he's paying for the sins of the past. And I mean, I don't even think he's an auto take in Legion of Night.
No,
actually,
he's all right. I don't think you're shooting yourself in the foot or anything if you pick him. But he's competing with a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon because he doesn't really bring much else to the table. Though there is a point to be made here with his guys for it adds +1 to hit or +1 to wound, Ryan?
+1 attack.
+1 attack, right? Yeah. And there's a point to be made here because I always combine it with Graveguard, and Graveguard with a Vampire Lord on foot that adds an extra attack on top of them is very strong. So Manfred would also be very strong in that aspect, in that respect.
Yeah.
So there is a point to be made there, but it's a little bit weird. I don't know. It would have been really cool if it was summonable units and battle line, for example. Then maybe it would work with Vargeists or Legion of Night battle line. That would be so awesome.
Yeah, that could have been fun. Yeah, it just kind of all leans into, like, I feel like they missed the mark on Legion of Night. But I know you. What was your main argument why this is one of the stronger ones?
Well, I do agree that the how should I put this? The battle line unlocking is not great, but that's never been one of the reasons why you would play Legion of Night. In the previous book, there really was no reason for me to ever play Legion of Night besides the flavor of it. And now the generic buffs that you get from this subfaction are just really good. I really like the teleporting. I really like the counter charge because it's just mind games. It's the same reason why I like Neferata with her resetting up D3 units is mind games. And Morbek's Claw has always been good because I always ran at least one Necromancer. Now I'm probably never gonna run the Necromancer, but still run the Vampire Lord. And +2 for all wizards wholly within 12 is nothing to sniff at. So
no, not at all. Yeah, I think you're right that if you're building a certain kind of build, this is fine. I still don't think it's Legion of Blood good though.
No, no, for sure.
It definitely has more movement shenanigans, so that's cool.
Yeah, but I wouldn't rate it as the lowest subfaction or anything.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it in those terms, so I'll let you know at the end.
Yeah, okay. We good to move on?
Mm-hmm.
We're taking our sweet time here, but I just read that my opponent that I was going to play today has cancelled or has messed up his planning or something, so we're good. We can take some extra time. So Virkos, this was the big newcomer in the previous book, a new dynasty for werewolf vampires. They unlock no extra battle line. And all of their rules have changed, actually. There's nothing akin to what there was in the previous book at all. I do feel that they've really hammered down on a specific theme now for Virkos that fits their army much better. But overall, I do feel that they are worse now than they were before.
Yeah, in talking about the battle line, maybe it's worth pointing out that this subfaction, due to Curse City alone, has a ridiculous number of keyword locked its units. It's 9 heroes and 3 non-hero units. Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of them end up benefiting Virkos directly as a kind of implied battle trait. So there is a lot of kind of other stuff going on underneath the hood here that isn't necessarily just looking at the warscroll or the battle traits themselves.
For sure, yeah. If you're playing with Curse City units, then that's actually just a secret secret trait here for this subfaction. You get to play with with the bonuses of all the Curse City units. I mean, you could also take them in different subfactions, of course, but they don't mesh well with these with their traits. Okay, So the strength of the wolf is in the pack. If in the combat phase, after friendly Virkos hero has fought for the first time that phase, pick one friendly Virkos unit that has not fought that phase and that is within 3 inches of an enemy and wholly within 12 inches of that friendly Virkos hero, that unit fights immediately. Note, if a second hero is picked, that this ability does not trigger again. So this is actually the same rule that was in the White Dwarf that you mentioned before, Ryan, but the only thing that they changed was it can still be a monster hero now. And you can also pick a different hero to fight. So for example, if you would run 2 zombie dragons with a vampire lord on top, in theory you could have them fight back to back.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a neat ability, and it's kind of your Illumineth. Yep. Yeah, what is it? Whatever it's called, where you get to fight twice.
Lightning fast reactions.
Yes.
You love it, Ryan, don't you?
I always forgot that I had it, but because I was trying not to.
Yeah, you don't want to fight with your list.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is quite a good ability. I tried to use it a lot on Radakar the Beast because it was only for normal heroes, not for monster heroes before. Now I really can see it popping off way more often. The amount of times where I was in combat with a full unit of Graveguard and my Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon or Radukar and then having them fight back to back is... You could really obliterate certain units before your opponent even got to strike back. So this is a really strong trait that really cannot be undervalued here.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you also get 2 heroic actions for your Virkos Vampire heroes. So not your other heroes, so that is quite important. Pick one Virkos Vampire hero, then pick one friendly Virkos Deadwalker units within 12 inches of that hero and invisible to them. You can add D3 models to that unit. So not D3 wounds, but D3 models, which is quite big because I think the point here is that you can add 3 wolves because for all other Virkos Deadwalkers units, it doesn't really matter. But as of right now, there is a gimmick that has kind of taken over the internet here. Do you know what that gimmick is, Ryan?
No, I don't.
Okay, so you've got a Corsari Night Guard in Cursed City. They have 4 wounds, they're quite slow, but they do quite a lot of damage and they tank wounds for Radakar, the guy on foot, not the beast one, the wolf. And they actually have the Deadwalkers keyword now. So if you're adding D3 models to that unit, then you could potentially return 8 wounds or something. I would say 12, but you can't reinforce them, so 8 wounds is the maximum.
Does it? How are you bring? You can't bring 8 because you need at least 1 model on to do it.
Yeah, so there's 3 models in the Night Guard, right?
Well, it's 2.
Oh, is it 2?
Yeah. And is it adding above the original count, or is it bringing back slain models?
Oh yeah, that's right. That's the thing. That's the thing. Yeah, you're right. That's the thing. I messed up 2 of my my things that I wanted to mention, and now I put them all into one basket. So yeah, no, it is, as you said, it is not returning, it is adding on top of it, because it specifically states that you can go over the amount of maximum models in the unit.
Yeah, so that is really strong for them. It's really sucking for your collection, though, because it's really hard to get those models.
Yeah, and you know, please do not start buying Corsari Night Guard now, because I fully expect this to be FAQ'd within... Well, within the first FAQ, to be honest.
Well, the thing is, previously you could reinforce them, so you could take a unit of 4 as a bodyguard for Radakar the Wolf, and it works, by the way, for Beast now too, the bodyguard thing. But the unfortunate thing is they made him single, so unless you want to take multiples of that unit, which you could do for the bodyguard as well. It doesn't really make sense to buy 2 copies of Cursed City or buy them off someone. And who wants to sell their Cursed City model thing? Because they need them for the Cursed City game itself.
Yeah, and they look awesome.
Yeah, so it's always been weird to try to collect 4 of these guys. You can buy them separately, but you have to buy them with all of the named heroes all over again in a box. And same with Virkos Bloodborne, the vampires, which are great now. Anyway. Yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, I feel like all the Cursed City models are things that you really need to get your creativity going for, because it's just such a great opportunity to start converting stuff, since you can't really find it as often as you could before. I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, and then King of the Wolf. This used to be a thing for Radakar the Beast. This was his command, one of his command abilities, and now it's just a heroic action that you can do once per battle. So once per battle, pick one Virgo's vampire hero and add 1 unit of 10 direwolves to your army. Set it up wholly within 9 inches of that hero and 9 inches away from enemies. The direwolves cannot move in the following movement phase. I love that they made a heroic action out of this. I really always wanted to use it on Radakar, but he either got shot off the table or I needed his command points for something else. And now this being heroic action, it is quite cool that you can just do it straight away.
Yeah. Yeah. I still wish they'd make wolves a unit of 5.
Yes.
Because they're on cavalry, normal small cavalry bases, but to keep coherency, you're kind of screwed with them, and they just, I don't know. I feel like those wolves sit in a weird place. Summoning 5, I wouldn't have complained if you got to summon 2 units of 5 or something.
Yeah, that would be so cool.
They did lose for battle traits, though. They did lose adding 1 for Death Rattle and Deadwalkers, wholly within 9 of a vampire hero. That's kind of weird. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't fit, like you said, it doesn't really fit, but Deadwalkers are wolves too, right?
Yeah.
And then they lost their rerolling casting, which is kind of, like you said, maybe that doesn't fit in the lore, but that was one of the strongest things they had going for them.
Yeah, they're more animalistic now in the sense that they're more aggressive, or the traits reinforce that idea at least. Whereas before, I mean, I was hardly running any wolves in Virkos. I was running Graveguards because they benefited massively from that +1 to hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to their command traits. This is cool. They include unique Virkos generals, and I initially thought that was probably a typo, but you convinced me otherwise, Ryan.
Yeah. How so?
Well, you mentioned that because there's just so many unique characters in Virkos that it might happen that you actually don't have any generic heroes in your list, and that you always have to skip command traits and artifacts because of that.
Yeah, and they're so obvious to take. I mean, with 9 different heroes and so many of them are good, you're gonna often see it. And you said it could be a typo, but it's too much typing out to be a typo.
Yeah, you're
right. You know what I mean? And they wrote it on both command traits and artifacts. So to me, it just seems like this was intentional, which is great. And it's the first time it's ever happened in 2nd edition or 3rd edition, to my knowledge. So maybe in 1st, I don't know. But it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and they did a really good job of making both the traits and the artifacts not overpowered in any combination with a unique Virkos character here.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so driven by Death Stench, you can reroll charge rolls for friendly Virkos units wholly within 9 inches of this general. Again, this reinforces that aggressive nature of the wolf in them, which I quite like. Reroll charge is also one of my favorite abilities to have on any units. It's so cool and good. Anything to add?
Nope.
Hunter Snare. This is exactly the same as it was before. For the purposes of contesting objectives, this general counts as a number of models equal to their wounds characteristic. So usually you took this on your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, and then he would count as 14, I think. Now he even went up 2 wounds, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
So a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon counting as 16 on an objective is quite important.
And
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You would love this rule on Gargants, right?
Yeah, as mercenaries,
Yeah, not on their wound characteristic, but just on their wounds.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the way they've got it listed as a bracketable thing on Gargants is fine. I just wish it was accessible for mercenaries. But the allied versions. The slight thing that did change here is that they had FAQ'd it that it couldn't be further modified once you count it as your wounds characteristic by how many wounds you count as a monster or as a hero or whatever. That was for some weird niche case, I think, because it doesn't really seem like it wasn't like it said you count as +3 models if you're a monster or something, and otherwise you had 5 wounds. It's not like that's how it was worded. So I don't know why in the first place, but maybe just to be clear. But they didn't mention it this time. I imagine that it doesn't need mentioning, but technically that's different.
Yeah. Okay, and then the sport trackers, that's also the same, I think. At the start of your hero phase, friendly Virkos, Deadwalkers units, only within 9 inches of the general can make a normal move of up to 3 inches. This used to be very good with the zombie piling stuff. You can obviously still do that with the wolves, but honestly, getting 10 wolves on their big bases into combat and then them not doing any sort of damage at all is just not appealing to me.
Yeah. I don't have a strong opinion about this really. Other than obviously, like you said, it's leaning into more movement for this faction, and not necessarily movement shenanigans per se, but definitely just a more aggressive faction. They did lose one command trait that is a once per battle summoning of 5 dire wolves. So obviously you can do the 10, but when you combine it with what Radikar the Beast used to be able to do, you've actually netted out with less dire wolves that you can summon for free than before. So, but at least it's a heroic action that everyone can do. You don't have to choose as a command trait.
Yeah. Which one of these traits do you like the most?
Reroll charges.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool to make the general count as 10, and then you can also, of course, have a GC that's got stubborn as a Rhinox, so you're getting way more wounds for a small body count. But no, I think I'd probably go with the reroll charges because it applies to every build that you're going to do and not just Deadwalkers.
Yeah, and don't forget if you're moving your units from the grave sites 9 inches away from an enemy unit, that is quite a difficult charge to make. And with the rerolls, you at least have that bigger chance of getting that charge in. I
thought they were 3 inches out.
No, the resurrection is 3 inches, but if you're getting them from reserves, then it's 9 inches.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's a trick I always did. I just put 20 Graveguard in my grave sites because they only move 4 and they get shot off the board otherwise. Then I drop them outside of 9 from an enemy unit and then give them rerolls and let's just go. And pray to Nagash that he delivers on the 9 inches.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Artifacts also including Virko's heroes, which is cool. Ulfin Carni Phylactery. I think they added the I here, but I'm not sure. But I remember it being Ulfin Karn Phylactery. I don't know.
There was Ulfin Carnian before.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, so they got rid of the AN. Add 1 to ward rolls for friendly Virko's summonable units for the purposes of the Deathless Minions battle trait while they are wholly within 9 inches of the bearer. This is good. Very strong on zombies.
Yeah. So you're getting like a bit of a free Nagash ability. Kind of cool.
Does Nagash actually improve this one even further, or does it just put him on a? It does, right?
Puts him on a 5. It used to put him +1, and now it's just
yeah. So Nagash puts him on a 5, and this improves it by 1.
So you could technically double stack.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, that's not Nagash's bubble is not Deathless.
Oh, it is replaced. It says it replaced it.
No. It's just a bubble.
Oh, okay. It
has nothing to do with it. So it's
all right.
Yeah, two separate things.
Oh, that's too bad. But probably safest. The Terminus Clock. At the start of the hero phase, you can roll a d6 on a 3+ until the end of that phase to subtract 1 from casting rolls for enemy wizards. Quite good. Map wide.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
I wish it wasn't on a 3+.
Exactly. Yeah.
But at least it triggers multiple times. You get 5 to do it.
Yeah.
My favorite's the next one.
Yeah, standard of the Ulfin Watch. If the bear is on the battlefield, you can roll a d6 each time your opponent spends a command point. On a 4+, you receive 1 extra command point. So good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also very cool to model, to be honest. Like a vampire with a big ass banner.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, I feel like it's the default setting. Getting extra command points is always the thing. And yes, modeling it like that would be cool. I never think about that kind of stuff, but that's really cool that you do. I'm looking here real quickly at the, what's it called? The the things we lost. There used to be Vilnius's Fang, gave you once per battle, adding 1 to charge rolls for the bearer for each other friendly Virkos Dynasty vampire hero on the field, which would be obviously +5 max, which is pretty cool. But I don't feel like we're really missing that. I feel like the standard of the Ulfin Watch, which used to be on a 5-up instead of a 4-up, and it was only once per battle. Now it's just all the time. I mean, it got the biggest upgrade, I think, out of all of these.
Yeah, imagine running this against Ossiarch Bone Reapers.
Right, or anything getting 1 million CP.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
keep in mind, I don't know all the CP rules or all the rules for OBR now. I'm trying to stay ignorant so I can do a special video on that. But
okay, sorry.
No, it's all good.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
REP's gone.
Yeah, I know that part. I saw that in the
Okay. I honestly, it's cool. I wouldn't skip the Elfin Carney Phylactery just out of the gate though. It is still quite a strong rule. Imagine just dropping 20 or 40 zombies from your reserves within 9 inches of the bear, and then just having that as a screen on a 5+ ward is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, maybe take both.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that is true. Good point. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to mention on the Virkos?
And no, like you said, these don't really do anything to amp up any of the given unique heroes, so it doesn't feel broken. It's just kind of they're a locale for these bubbles and stuff, so it feels fine enough.
Yeah, honestly, I like their generic trades, their artifacts, and their command rates are all pretty good. I just really feel that it doesn't enable any wolf-like units in the game. Like
all those summonable units are wolves. I mean, that they are one of them, so...
Yeah, but wolves now are just so bad. They're so terribly bad. They have the pile-in move now. If you guys don't know, they have the pile-in move now that the zombies used to have, which is a massively cool rule, and it fits the wolves very well. But the thing just is that I would love wolves if they were, as you mentioned, once again 5 model sized units for a cheaper price, because then they go from a cumbersome unit that's kind of in the way of moving your other troops, because that's always been the case for me when I played wolves, to I'm running those guys in front of my unit as a sort of tracking kind of packs that then just unleash hell or eat pile-in things before I get into it with my other units.
Yeah.
Anyway, that rant over.
I agree.
Yeah, moving on to the Castelli. So Castelli is probably the one that was most popular before.
Hold on just a second. Hold on. I hate to be this guy again. I know you didn't set up your slides this way, but I'd at least like to talk about Belladama.
Okay, yep. Belladama time.
I'm not going to talk about all of the people because, like I said, there's a number that benefit Virkos, but she does have a few things, right? So she adds 1 to casting, dispelling, and unbinding rolls, but in addition to that, and in this same rule, if the unit's within 3 inches of any friendly Virkos direwolf, before you allocate a wound, she's got a 3-up pass on the wound. And it's worth pointing out that all the bodyguard rules have been cleaned up, so it's obvious that it's in place of a ward, which is good to know. And then obviously she's got Lycan Curse, which can bring direwolves for the number of models killed in a unit after she does D3 mortal wounds to them. And then Under a Killing Moon is another spell that if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with a friendly Virkos unit wholly within range of the character, which is 24, which is super large, is a 6, it gets exploding hits. Yeah. So those are pretty big buffs, I'd say, for Belladama. And you've got other things like Radikar has a summonable thing that adds 1 to attacks characteristic of them. That's both Radikars. And let's see, real quick. Other people that have the keyword would be Gorslav. He's got something for zombies, and Deadwalker zombies, which it's the same thing. And then Torgelius has for summonable units, giving them a ward. And Captain Halgrim has something for Death Rattle. So there are a few different buffs in there that definitely benefit your army if you're going full for your coast. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit more than it looks on the surface.
Yeah, Torgilius and Halgrim are both pretty good now, and I think worth considering putting in your list. Gorslav is now keyword to just Virkos zombies, so that's different. So you don't really want to take him in other dynasties anymore.
Right. Yeah, which is good. That balances things out. Although
Yeah,
he doesn't seem that wolfy. So
no, true. Yeah, and then something to mention on Radakar the Beast. He's a little bit cheaper, but you know, he usually includes the cost of 10 direwolves in his price tag.
yeah.
So now he's a little bit more expensive, but he did get some buffs. He used to be only -1 to hit. Now he's -1 to hit and -1 to wound all the time.
Yeah.
And he's also a little bit faster because he has this trait that when he takes damage, you get to push him up d6 inches or something. So that is interesting. Interesting to note also for Belladama, though her spells are still amazingly strong, she did lose some reliability on that front because she can't reroll her spells anymore.
Yeah.
So I do think she's taking quite a big hit actually in that regard. Because that's literally the only thing she brings to the table.
Yeah, I'd still say she's stronger in her faction than Manfred.
Yeah.
In terms of what she does to buff them,
Yeah,
but
she's also cheaper.
And nowhere near as good as Neferata.
Yeah, and I mean, also for the model, she looks amazing. Who doesn't want a grandma werewolf sitting on another wolf, right?
If that isn't something that someone came up with while smoking weed, I don't.
I love their entire aesthetic. I know there's a lot of haters out there as well because they don't like the wolf thingy in a vampire tome, but the entire Tsar vibe that they've going on is just so cool.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Okay, on to
Now-
Kastelai. So Kastelai was the most popular faction in the tournament scene simply because Blood Knights were amazing and Vordrai was amazing, and it still unlocks Blood Knights as battle line, but Blood Knights did get a little bit worse in some regards and a little bit better in others. So let's dive right into it because we've been going for quite a long time. It is also, to be fair, it is quite a big tome as well, but I want to keep this to a max of 3 hours or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the end of the combat phase, if any models, this is different, not units, but models, were slain with melee weapons by Kastelai vampire units in that phase, pick one relevant ability to apply to that unit. If multiple abilities can be picked, choose one. The first two abilities do not affect mounts. So for example, if your Blood Knights or your Vargheists or one of your vampire heroes slay a hero or a monster, they get +1 damage to their melee weapons for the rest of the game. If they slay a model, that does not affect mounts, by the way. If they slay a model with 3 or more wounds, but it can't be a hero or a monster, they get +1 attack, also does not affect mounts. And then if they slay a model with 2 or less wounds, they get +1 to move. Obviously it does affect mounts because that's the entire unit. So yeah, still a very strong rule, much easier to proc now because it's only on models and not units.
Yeah, and there are a number of ways to spread this out and give extra people this ability in a given turn.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Though I do think they lost the artifact where you could stack it for a moment. Like you had one killy turn with that one artifact that you could proc.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've seen a lot of annoyed people about their Kastelai list, which I understand because if you've bought like 20 Blood Knights and now you're coming up to a point where you can't run that list anymore or not as effectively anymore, I do feel you. I understand your pain. I think we're past that point where you're able to run an effective full Blood Knights list in a tournament, but that's a very bold statement, to be fair. Okay. Heroic action for the Kastelai Vampire heroes. So you get to pick one Kastelai Vampire hero until the end of that turn. At the end of each phase, if any wounds or mortal wounds were allocated to that hero and it is not slain, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 3 inches. On a 2+, that unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. Flavorful, cool, and quite strong in certain situations.
I mean, we're talking about 2 phases mainly. If they have shooting, or 2 if they have magic and not shooting. 3 max. Um, I don't know. I think it's cool, but if you're only getting 1 heroic action, I don't know that that's the one you're going to be choosing.
Yeah, the annoying thing is that your opponent knows once you pick it that that's a thing that's going to happen, and they can plan around it. And I don't really feel like that's the flavor that you want to go with here. I wouldn't mind for this to be a command trait that you could just once per turn during 1 phase put on a hero.
Yeah, if it was more ambiguous where it was going.
Yeah.
Or something. The other thing is what it's really doing, like I was talking about with the movement shenanigans from Legion of Night, is this is really just telling your opponent there's a risk involved with attacking this dude, so it's making him tankier.
Yeah.
So they have to choose whether they want to maybe suffer the wounds or not. Obviously, it doesn't do anything if you're not standing within 3 inches. So, you know, if you're putting it, it's not going to work on the guy that's not wanting to be in combat as is.
Yeah, and this is probably only going to be useful on your Vampire Lords and Zombie Dragons, to be honest.
You know what would have been really great for the Blood Knights situation is if they had done something like what Knights of the Empty Throne does and make all Blood Knight champions count as be able to do hero.
That'd be so cool.
And if they made each champion from the unit able to be do this, and then you could kind of, oh, all right, maybe I will, because you do want those Blood Knights in combat.
That is so badass. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Games Workshop. Hi, Ryan.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Maybe we should quickly address the Blood Knight situation because we're going to keep referring to it, and if people have not seen the leaks or don't even remember what the situation is. So, what has changed with Blood Knights? Blood Knights used to have the ability Riders of Ruin. They still have it, but it has been adjusted a little bit. So before, it was kind of a hit and run situation where you could move out of combat. It didn't really count as a retreat move. So you could, as an ability, could just move them out and then recharge. So you could always get the bonus that you get from charging your units, which was super cool. And they did mortal wounds when you moved over units. Now you still have that last part, so you still do mortal wounds when you're moving over units, which is nice, but you can't retreat and then charge again later in the same turn, which does affect their damage quite a lot. Now, to compensate for that, they've increased their range on their attacks to 2 inches from 1, and they've increased their rend from 1 to 2, because you used to get +1 rend for a charge, and now you always have the -2 rends. But you do lose on damage because their lands are damage 1, 2 on the charge, and you not being able to cycle charge as we call it, so keep on charging every turn, does hamper their damage quite a lot, and also their flexibility in regards to movement.
Well, I don't know if this is part of the chat, but that's been going on, but it does need an FAQ, because all it says for the mortal wounds stuff is it says after this unit has moved. It doesn't say what kind of move, which means currently with rules as written, you can, if let's say you're already outside of combat with someone, you move over them to a normal move and then come back outside of 3. Then you charge, and you can charge over a unit, right? Like if you're flying, you could technically move over them outside of half.
Yeah.
And then you do your pile-in. So that means you're triggering it 3 times on a charge move turn. I don't know if that's what people are talking about, and I don't know if that's going to stay, but currently it's possible to roll essentially 3 2-ups that do D3 mortal wounds. That's not a broken, or that's kind of broken to me in my mind. And that is not a nerf to the Blood Knights. I mean, like, let's see, they went up 30 points, but, and their hunger got better.
Yeah.
And the movement shenanigans are no longer turned off for mounts, which is great. Like you said, their melee's +1 inch range and +1 rend. I don't know. I think if they let that stay, that all 3 of those things can trigger it, that's a crap ton of mortal wounds that can be done. And if you're doing MSU, each unit of 5's doing it. So
yeah, I would say that the damage of the Blood Knights has become more reliable, but they're just less flexible. And I think that's the biggest complaint, that in a Castlei list, you used to run just a shit ton of Blood Knights, And now once you commit them to a fight, you obviously can retreat them as you can with every unit. But before you could retreat them and then charge them into a unit that was way further away just to cover more ground, because you really need that movement to have some control over the battlefield with such an elite list. And I think that's the biggest complaint here.
To be clear, before it wasn't a retreat, it was just a normal move.
Yeah, it counted as a normal move, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It depends on how that FAQ gets worded, but I think they're still good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think I also agree that they're still good. I just wouldn't build an entire list of Blood Knights anymore, probably. Anyway, let's move on to the Monstrous Rampage for the Kastlai monsters. So Battle Craze, add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made with melee weapons by this unit in the following combat phase. Which is very good because it doesn't only affect the mounts of a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, but also his weapons.
Which monster can do it?
The Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon?
No, but I mean, what's it restricted to? It says Kastlai monster, which means a Vingorian Lord can do it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It means Vordrai can do it. So so that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Vordrai loves this because with his new Quick Blood spell, he always fights first.
Right.
So that is quite impressive. Okay. This is wearing me down, Ryan. I don't know why. It's harder than usual, but I love it. I'm super hyped to play with this army again.
I mean, to be fair, we didn't cover Stormcast, and we haven't covered cities yet, because that hasn't come out yet. But we haven't had a book this big yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Okay, so the command trait, Swift and Deathly, you can re-roll charge rolls for friendly Kastlai units while they are wholly within 12 inches of the general. This is the same as the Virgos one, but you get 3 extra inches, which is nice. Undead Blade Lords. Once per turn, if this general is on the field when a friendly Kastlai vampire unit gains an ability with the Might of the Crimson Keep traits that this general has not gained, this general gains that ability. So this is a little bit of a change on the Fragment of the Blood Keep, I think it was called, where you could just ramp up the Might of the Crimson Keep trait on all of your units within a certain range, and now it's just for your general, I think. Or no, that was an artifact. That was an artifact.
That was Rousing Commander, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
The one for game stone extra stuff?
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to? Yeah.
Okay, and then the Shifting Keep. During deployment, if the general is on the field, instead of setting up a Kastlai Blood Knights units on the field, you can place them in reserves. You can place 1 unit in reserves for each unit you set up on the battlefield. So that's basically the general deep strike rules. At the end of the movement phase, you can set up 1 or more Blood Knight units from reserve, wholly within 6 inches of a table edge and more than 9 inches away from all enemies.
Yeah, this was the rule. Yeah, it was just default battle trait for them, and now it's moved into a command trait. If I can understand, like, if you didn't want to do this, like it wasn't how you were building your army, then like, okay, cool, I don't have to take it. But it was free before. So the real question is, do the new things that they've gained make up for the fact that this is now something that eats up a command trait? I don't know. So.
Yeah, you really want that Swift and Deadly as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so would you agree that the first one is your preferred one?
Yeah, I mean, I could see running a list where you're trying to max out getting those Crimson Keep traits and then just lean into that, because there's other ways to do that too. I think Vordrai does it too, right? So you know, kind of interesting.
But do keep in mind that you only get to benefit from every bullet point once.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. I feel like you would probably be able to get this in a certain combat anyway. But you know, we'll see. Yeah. Artifacts. So the red caskets, add 3 to run rolls and charge rolls for that bearer. So add this on top of the recharging reroll to charge rolls. And you've got some very guaranteed charge on your on your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. Then the Fragment of the Keep. So this has been altered. Subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made with melee weapons by enemy units within 3 inches of the bearer. And then the Grave Sand Shard. Once per battle round, at the end of the Battle Shock phase, you can return 1 model to each friendly Kastlai summonable unit wholly within 18 inches.
Yeah, the red casket used to be once per battle, so this is way better than just flat. And that's kind of replacing amethystine pinions a bit.
Yeah.
Functionally. Let's see. Yeah. I guess yeah, the gravesand shard's kind of cool, I guess.
Oh, I was just going to say I just find it completely useless.
I mean, it's only summonable units though, so if it was Blood Knights, it would have been so much better.
Oof, it would be amazing.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, it's just leaning into stacking that stuff. If you're running for like a big hero hammer thing, then I would take red casket.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah.
And to be fair, you're always going to go for a hero hammer thing in Castelli, right?
Yeah, I guess that's I mean, I still think Legion of Blood's more built for it, but yeah.
Yeah, but if you want a lot of Blood Knights and you're going to add some monsters on top of that because you just should for that kind of army, you're either running Vordry or a Zombie Dragon Lords, or preferably even both.
Yeah.
Because they just work so well in tandem, I would say.
Right. And while we're talking about Vordry, just real quick, what I said before is he's doing the whenever a friendly Castellite vampire unit gains a Might of the Crimson Keep battle trait, you can pick one other friendly Castellite vampire holier than 24 that's not already gained it to gain it as well. That's pretty cool because it's not doubling up on necessarily the same unit again. So you're just getting to spread it out more. So pretty cool. And when the original unit gains it, that unit doesn't have to be within a bubble. It can be on the wholly other side of the battlefield. And then he can give it, the one that receives the new one has to be within 24 inches of Vordry. Otherwise, Vordry doesn't have anything else that applies to this subfaction. So.
But he's much better in my eyes. His spell is just way better than it was before. Before I think it added +1 to hit or +1 to wound. And now it's always strike first, which is really cool if you can keep that going until your next hero phase. So yeah, don't mess with that guy.
It is casting value 7, so you know he might not get it off the spell. But yeah,
that's fair. Okay,
cool.
The last one, last but not least, I would say, Avangori have gained Vargeist as extra battle line on top of the Terrorgeist and Zombie Dragon, which I find very cool because it does fit with the lore. Vargeists are kind of vampires that have let their inner beasts out too much and are too far gone to come back to a human form. So in that regard, it just really fits well with the Avangori theme, I feel. Let's look at the rule, Cursed Abominations. So once per turn at the start of the combat phase, you can pick one friendly Avangori monster within 3 inches of enemy units, so it has to be in combat. Until the end of that phase, use the top row of that unit's damage table, regardless of how many wounds it has suffered. Really cool.
Yeah. So you're basically getting the old monstrous rampage that we had in the first GHB from 3rd edition that allowed monsters to find a top bracket. So, and considering they want to run monsters, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I love this rule. It just enables Avangori shenanigans way better than the previous rules did. Yeah,
it's good.
Okay, and then you get 2 monsters. I typed rampages, but it should obviously be rampages for Avangori monsters here. So first one, Maddening Hunger. Pick up to D3 different enemy models within 1 inch of this unit and roll a D6 for each model. If the roll is greater than that model's wound characteristic, it is slain. I can imagine so many disappointed players, but also totally hyped up tournament games where this triggers. I kind of like it. I like it a lot, actually.
Well, it's the Gargan stuff them in my pants kind of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's really good against Lumineth units that you want to pull the caster out of the unit. So I just take out the command models.
Yeah, but you get to choose D3 different enemy models, which is also quite cool, because if you're just going for a YOLO roll and you get like 3 enemy models, sure, you're going to pick like the sergeants out because that's a guaranteed kill, but maybe you just want to go for a small hero as well and just hope you roll a 6 to top that 5 wound model, and then oops, it's gone. I know, I feel like that would be such a hype moment.
Yeah, sorry, I just had someone, a repairman come in, so I actually didn't get to listen.
Okay.
So let's just keep going.
Anyway, the YouTube listeners here were totally on board with my hype talk. So yeah, I was just hyping up the ability, Ryan. Let's move on to the Unstoppable Nightmare.
Okay.
So the Unstoppable Nightmare, until the end of the following combat phase, the first time a different friendly Avangori unit within 6 inches of this unit is destroyed, this unit can fight immediately after the last slain model in the destroyed unit is removed from play. So let's say you've got a bait unit of skeletons or maybe even Vargeists within 6 inches, and that unit gets completely destroyed, your monster can fight again, I would say.
Yeah, so obviously this is weird because it's not fight on death for your dude that dies. It's kind of fight on death for someone else,
yeah.
right? And it's pretty cool. Obviously, you want to keep those monsters near each other, right? So,
yeah, it doesn't even have to be a different monster. That's quite important in my head. Like, you just get some very cheap ass skeleton units, 10 models, 85 points, I think. You resummon them or you resurrect them. They will die as a screen, and then you come in with your monstrous rampage where you get to fight immediately.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it is the monster that has to do the rampage, but it's not or rompage, but but it's not the original unit that dies.
Yeah, and this would effectively allow a monster to fight twice in that same turn.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is very strong. I really think this is a good reason to bring like a very small amount of screens or just units that you want to sacrifice, and then those monsters just go nuts because of the Unstoppable Nightmare.
Cool. Yeah. I feel like Avangori definitely got a bit of a glow up from what they previously had, but it's still encouraging to roll into something that maybe you that you wouldn't have done before.
Yeah.
Which is run a monster heavy list. I don't know how competitive it ultimately is, but I did write an Avangori. Take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to use a Zombie Dragon Terrorgeist monster list with Vargeist, you're probably just playing Flesh Eater Courts already.
Right.
Right. But there's not a big difference between those kind of units and these, so you could just as well make a small leap, just get Luca Vi, and you're good to go, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay. The command traits. Monstrous Might, subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target friendly Avangori monsters wholly within 12 inches of the general. That's kind of cool. It does require you to have your monsters nearby, and honestly, I can see that happening if you're running a Vengorian Lord or something, because you want to keep that close by to a monster anyway.
Yeah, I mean the monsters aren't indestructible in this army. So having this makes a big difference, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Torment-driven throws. At the start of the combat phase, you can roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 3 inches of this general. On a 5+, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound, and this is the catch, the strike loss effect applies to that unit until the end of the phase. What do you think about this one?
It's swingy. You're not going to be able to rely on it. 1 mortal wound's kind of whatever, but it would have been better if it was a default does 1 mortal wound and then on a 5 strike last, and then putting everything on a 5 up here is you really need to go to make it go off. You need to go into multiple units and max out your surface area here. I wouldn't take this personally. Strike last is great, but 5 up is not very reliable. So,
yeah, it balances out because you get to do it to each enemy unit within 3. So if you're in a multi-combat, it could be interesting. But yeah, it's too swingy probably.
And it might not be the unit you want it to be, right?
Yeah.
You maybe it's if you're going into 3 units, probably one of them's a screen, and it's like, oh great, that screen's I wish I hadn't turned them into. It's not going to change it.
Yeah. Okay, and the last one, Unhinged Rampager. You can re-roll charge rolls for this general, which is always nice. In addition, at the end of the shooting phase, if any mortal wounds or normal wounds were allocated to this general in that phase, and this general is more than 9 inches from all enemy units, this general can move up to d6 inches. Did you take this one?
I don't remember what I took actually. Now that I'm thinking about it,
We'll
but
find out soon.
yeah, but I like the movement shenanigans. I think I took Monstrous Might actually. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
but this I don't know. It's again they have to have taken some amount of wounds in a given phase, and then also be outside of 9 inches. Which this is great if they're shooting at you or doing magic. But oh no, it's the shooting phase. It's only the shooting phase.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Once you get into combat with this subfaction, I mean,
you dropped off there. Once you get into combat with the subfaction,
you're gonna be in combat for the rest of the game, unless you just clear something so out. But being outside of 9, I just don't see it happening that often.
Yeah, I wouldn't have mind a reroll to charge ability for this subfaction as well, because I would even argue that that it's way more important for these guys than it is for the other legions.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely want to be in combat. They don't have the charge bonuses are pretty much only, if I remember correctly, only on the zombie dragon riders. So getting the charge off doesn't necessarily matter. If they come into you, then like you're happy anyway. And the dragons move pretty fast, and so do the Vargeist. I'm more disappointed that they got rid of mount traits, because I felt like that was really flavorful. Granted, you've got some monstrous rampages, but we also have monstrous rampages too. So I like mount traits. I feel like you're getting a free command trait for a monster, or a free artifact for a monster, and that's pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
But oh well, we lost those guys.
Yeah. Okay, on to the artifacts. This bummed me out so much, Ryan, because I hated the Avangori artifacts in 2nd edition, and I was just like, please do them right this time. And honestly, again, they're all once per battle, which I already hate from the get-go, but all the effects are also mediocre at best, usually.
Yeah.
Oh god. Anyway, sorry Games Workshop for being negative here, but please don't make a full list of once per battle artifacts for a subfaction. That's just a little bit mean, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. Breath of the Void Maw. Once per battle, at the start of the combat phase, you can pick one enemy unit within 6 inches of the bearer that is visible to them and roll a dice. On a 2+, that unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to that roll. That's just a little bit of a bursty Arcane Bolt.
Yeah, if you do the math on it, it comes out to about a 50% increase of what it used to do on average, which was on a 3-up, it did D6 mortal wounds. So this is more reliable and is less swingy. So,
but once per bat, anyway.
Yeah.
Weird. Gorvar's Collar, once per battle at the start of the combat phase, the strike first effect applies to the bearer until the end of that phase. This seems cool.
Yeah, this is the one I took, and I think once per battle strike first is totally fair.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And then
and then the Furious Crown, once per battle at the start of your charge phase, you can use this artifact. After the bearer makes a charge move in that phase, you can pick one enemy unit within 1 inch of the bearer and roll a number of d6 equal to the charge roll. For each 4, that unit suffers a mortal wound. So this is like the Tusk Helm, but then once per battle. Yeah,
I wish this was like, if you didn't want it to be too strong, you can make it every turn that you get a charge, because you're not getting a charge every turn, right? Like it's not 5 times this. And then if you want to if you're worried about you're rolling too many dice for +3 charge or something, then just make it unmodified charge roll, and then it's fair.
Yeah, and to add Soul to Injury here, Ryan, you have to use this artifact at the start of your charge phase, so you're not even sure you're making that charge.
Yeah, I that's just a downside of the fact that a charge roll is simultaneously an amount and a binary on-off, whether successful or not. So,
but why wouldn't you say once per battle after completing a charge move?
Because then before you commit to using it, if you only need a 3-inch charge and you rolled a 3, then you might say like, oh, I don't want to use it anymore because I'm only going to get to roll 3 dice. So you've seen how many dice you get to roll. I think what it would have been fair if you want to avoid what you're talking about is saying that after you successfully made a charge, that you can take it back after you've committed to it if you don't successfully make the charge, is what I mean. So you have to commit before you know what the role is, but if you don't successfully make the charge, you don't have to. You still get to keep it.
Yeah. Okay.
And save it for later. That would have been somewhere in the middle, I think.
Yeah. So I think in either case, we agree that Gorvar Scholar is the one to go with. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I do.
Okay. So you want to cover Luca Vi quickly, or want to save it for your list?
No, I'll do it now.
Okay.
Just to be consistent. She has two things that affect Avangori monsters. And it's worth pointing out that the generic version of her war scroll basically also needs to be in this list, but he doesn't officially affect Avangori monsters, but he affects monsters that don't have a mount. That don't have a rider, so non-hero monsters. Her thing, though, is for all monsters, which is going to include all Avangori monsters, herself, and then Vingorian Lord as well. So once per turn, at the end of the charge phase, you can do 2 monstrous rampages. That's awesome. For a monster within 12 inches, and the other one is her spell. Pick a friendly Avangori monsters are eligible to fight in the combat phase if they're within 6 inches of that enemy unit instead of 3, as long as they're within 24 inches of her. It's picking one enemy unit that's within 24 inches, and then all your Avangori monsters get to have the zombie pile in, which is great.
Yeah, that's really good.
Fantastic. And then the other guy basically just lets them have the hunger, and then there's another rule that we'll have to cover later. But yeah, pretty strong buffs if you're taking the 2 Vingorian Lord options, the named and non-named, in Avangori specifically.
Yeah, I really like Luca Vi. You'll see it in a moment because we're going to move on to favorite war scrolls now. But she's one of my picks. Obviously only in Avangori, but she's a really strong enabler in that faction.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So an overview here. Let's just quickly talk about which one you prefer or which one you like the most. I think we've covered almost anything, and we've actually also answered that question already. So I think we both agree that Legion of Blood right now has come out on top, whereas it used to be probably on the bottom.
Yeah, there was a version of Legion of Blood where you would take Neferata with the Blood Knights, right, and make them like really tanky. But I agree, Legion of Blood is probably the now.
Yeah, and on the bottom I think for you might be Legion of Night, but for me it's probably Virkos, which is a strong opinion, I know, because it has so many Virkos specific heroes, and to be fair, I don't really take that in account when I make my ranking here. It's just when I look at their generic abilities, Virkos is the one that impressed me the least.
Yeah, I think it's cool they got so many extra models, so that's fun. And I agree that Legion of Night, you've convinced me that it works better with certain builds, and for the original lore, it just isn't what I want it to be.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I actually kind of feel like some of these sub-factions are... I feel like a lot of things in Soulblight, I just haven't quite figured out how they're supposed to all work together. And previously, it seemed, even though I agree that what they've done is streamlining and have made the sub-factions in some ways more interesting, at the same time, it just isn't really popping out to me exactly what you need to do in this to make a good list. So,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's going to take some time.
Yeah, that's always been the thing with Soulblight, and that's what I like a lot about the book. That it is different in the way that when you see people posting lists on the internet, for example, there is no clear way to break down a list or to tell people this is what you need to be competitive in Soulblight, because there's just so many things you can do, and I really feel like they managed to get that feeling into this book once again. Like in the last book, you could argue that most sub-factions were a fair sub-faction to take in a competitive setting. I think you can still argue that's the case for all of them now. It's not where you have one specific sub-faction that trumps, or well, maybe Legion of Blood, but other than that, that trumps all others. And even if you want to pick Legion of Blood, it kind of forces you into that hero hammer, which you might not want to do. And that's the cool thing with Soulblight. You can just create these lists that are very strong and they could be wildly different from one another. Whereas if you're looking at Luna, for example, even though I love my elf boys to death, there are specific units or builds that you will always see coming back because they are just staples and you need it, between air quotes here. And that's not the case with Soulblight, and probably that's the feeling that you're experiencing now, where you don't really understand the book completely, because that's probably not even possible. It's not, there's not like a hidden code in the book that tells you like if you put all of these units in a list together, you're going to win. Right?
Yeah. I think my kind of my antipathy, if you will, for horde units. Yeah. I know that Graveguard are fantastic. I've seen them play out. I don't want to run them. Yeah. I know that zombies and skeletons have their place. I don't want to run them. And so there's a part of me that's like, well, what do I have left? And then I feel like with what do I have left is just not enough to convince me that I can make a super strong army. And the Blood Knights thing has been done to, you know, the end of the earth. People have definitely played that well, and it doesn't inspire me anymore. So I kind of sit in a weird place here of not knowing what to do. I've thought about buying this army times, and every time I think about it a little bit longer, I'm like, nah. So maybe it's also just my personal preferences, but I do think the army is strong.
No, I get that feeling. I get that feeling a little bit. It's yeah, I'm not actually sure whether I would buy into this army if I didn't already have it from the fantasy days, but I do still appreciate what they've done with the book here, and it's just so flexible. Okay, so this is kind of where we're gonna leave you for part one. This video turned out to be quite a bit lengthier than we expected, so we're gonna split this review into two parts. So during this part one here, we covered all the basics, we covered the subfactions, and for the next part, which will come out tomorrow, we'll be able to look at the war scrolls and both Ryan's and my lists. And that will be an interesting extra bit to add on top of this review. By the time that you've completely watched this, it might actually already be out part two, so take a look on our channel to check it out. You're also very welcome to join us in the Discord, where we're happy to answer your questions or talk about further Soulblight lists. And also please feel free to share and subscribe to the channel, or even like the video, leave a comment if you enjoyed it, what you think about the new tome. It also gets us a little bit more, it picks us up, I guess, for the algorithm, and it makes sure that the channel gets a bit of the recognition it usually deserves, I feel. So yeah, thank you for watching. Ryan, thank you for doing part one here with me.
Definitely.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for part two. Bye-bye.